Morning, it's January 30th, and it is Happy Birthday to Evan Glass Day. It is...
No proclamation.
It is, we don't have a proclamation for that, but I have hereby proclaimed it. So. It is great to be here for a council session. We have two really exciting proclamations here today. We're going to start with a proclamation recognizing Delta Sigma Theta Day here at the County Council by Councilmember Sales, Albornoz, and Jawando. So let me turn it over to them for a presentation and welcome up the Deltas.
Yeah. All of them. All of them.
Come on in, everybody come on in.
Yeah, let Barbara get on this side.
Yeah,
of you.
okay.
Oh, no?
I'll kick us off and then I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, okay. Can you see everything? It's no perfect. Yes, good, good.
So we don't have to all be...
Yeah. I know. Yeah. All right, well, good morning, good and blessed people. It is such a privilege and honor to be with all of you today as we celebrate the second annual Delta Day here in Montgomery County. The Delta Sigma Theta sorority has been a pillar in our community since 1913, and they have an extraordinarily successful chapter here in Montgomery County who has been doing tremendous work to build bridges, to build trust, and to help ensure that we enhance public health, help improve our affordable housing situation here in the county, and make sure that we are connecting to every single county resident. The extraordinary programs that they lead every year are educating our community on vital issues that are truly saving lives. I am privileged and honored to be joined by two colleagues this morning, both members of the Divine Nine. And first we will hear from Councilmember Lori-Ann Sales, who is a proud member of this extraordinary sorority. Councilmember Sales.
Thank you, Councilmember Albornoz, and good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all of my sorors for joining us for the second annual Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated Day here in Montgomery County, where we hear about the priorities and issues that are important to them. And we had an opportunity earlier this morning to share all of the work that we've been doing on the council. And so we are excited to present this proclamation to honor and recognize the work that they do. So as Councilmember Albornoz mentioned, I am a very proud member of the Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And I wanted to acknowledge all of the work, all of the initiatives that Delta Sigma Theta Sorority has led on to help us pave the way for today. We became the first sorority to provide a program of employment counseling and career development for Black women. Our Forward Thrust program promoted educational and economic development, political involvement, international awareness, and physical and mental health. And our recent programs have included a partnership with Habitat for Humanity, 1990, to build homes in the United States and in Africa. A 2003 Delta Home Ownership Initiative program encouraged home buying among African Americans here as well. And the Montgomery County and Potomac Valley chapters in particular maintain frequent presence in our communities, always supporting our county's most important initiatives, from our young people with the Delta GEMS program and also our growing population. They have an extensive array of public service initiatives through its 5-point thrust of economic development, educational development, international awareness and involvement, physical and mental health, and political awareness and involvement. They also recognize service-oriented events like our annual World AIDS Day event and the annual MLK Day of Service. Finally, I want to commend the Montgomery County chapter for organizing an expungement clinic in October with the J. Franklin Bourne Bar Association, focused on assisting individuals who are eligible for expungement for misdemeanors and past marijuana, nonviolent criminal possession offenses. In December, I led an effort to call on Governor Wes Moore to pardon all incarcerated individuals convicted for nonviolent possession of cannabis offenses. I was so glad that my county executive and colleagues also joined us in that effort. We will continue to support individuals in giving them a fresh start as we reap the financial and medicinal benefits of this once criminalized medication that disproportionately decimated communities of color. To my sorors of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, I say thank you. Thank you for always having my back. Together we have brought Divine Nine leadership to the council and all the community service values that come with it. I look forward to celebrating many more Delta Days here in Montgomery County. Thank you.
Before I introduce Councilmember Jawando, I just want to acknowledge an important member of my team, Ms. Pam Luckett, who is a member of this extraordinary sorority and helped coordinate this morning's activities. Thank you so much, Pam, for your leadership in every way. And with that, my colleague and friend, Councilmember Jawando.
So you see how tight this sisterhood is. It's tight. And it very lucky, right? Exactly. And you wore the right color today as well. So Will Jawando, I'm an at-large member. I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, which is the first Divine Nine organization. And for those who don't know what Divine Nine is, it is the 9 historically black fraternities and sororities that were founded to support black students on college campuses. Initially, many of them started as study groups. That was Alphas, and to support each other in a time when they didn't have support. It has grown to service to all mankind.
Khan, president of the Korean American Women's Foundation of Greater Washington, Mr. Young Ha Kim, president of the Montgomery County Korean American Association, and the Krishna Poi, director of the Asian Pacific Governors Commission on Asian Pacific American Affairs, Dr. Hyun-Suk Choi, president of Korean American Association of State of Maryland, and Elena Lee with a beautiful Korean dress is the commissioner of the Governor's Commission on Asian Pacific American Affairs. And next to me is president of Korean American Senior Citizens Association of State of Maryland, and Mr. Myung Kwon. He's an artist with Korean language. Holographic boy. And next to it is Helen Won, president of Korean Society of Maryland. And next to person is Dr. George Young. She's the executive director of the Korean Community Service Center. And next to her is the Mr. Tu-Seok Jang, president of the Arirang Community Association. And with that, I'm going to introduce our Consul General, Cho, from the Korean Embassy, who wants to extend his appreciation for all you do at the County Council and County Executive's Office.
Thank you, Judge Paul. I'm very happy to be here together with you this morning here. Happily, we don't have snow today. Yeah. So, Mr. President of the Council and Mr. County Executive and honorable members of the Council, today marks another monumental day for all Korean Americans, especially for those living in Montgomery County. 121 years ago, 102 Koreans landed on the shore of Hawaii with a bare hand. Today, they have flourished into a community of 2.6 million people, and they have become an integral part of American society. the rich culture and tradition they brought about contribute greatly to the cultural diversity of America, and they play a significant role in the strengthening of comprehensive strategic alliance between the Republic of Korea and the United States. So the proclamation of Korean American Day by the Montgomery County Council today honors this long history of cooperation between our two nations, and I'm confident that it will start a momentum that will further strengthen this tie for many, many years to come. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to all of you, and I wish you and Montgomery County a year filled with nothing but success. I thank you very much, and County Executive Council and all of you will be welcome to Korea anytime you wish. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Now we're going to read the proclamation.
Whereas on January 13th, 1903, the first 102 Korean immigrants arrived in the Hawaiian Islands after a long journey across the Pacific Ocean, marking the first entry of Korean immigrants to the United States territories, and
Whereas the first Korean immigrants to the United States worked tirelessly to establish themselves, their descendants grew up to become citizens, many of whom went on to serve in the armed forces of the United States and have served in all major military conflicts since World War I. And
whereas Korean Americans have made vast contributions to the United States, including the invention of the first beating heart operation for coronary artery heart disease, the development of the nectarine, a very nice fruit, having a two-time Olympic gold medalist, and more achievements in the fields of science, technology, finance, law, medicine, education, sports, media, arts, military, government, and virtually all aspects of American life, and
whereas through hard work, talent, and resources, Korean Americans have helped to make Montgomery County one of the nation's most diverse and outstanding places to live, work, educate children, and raise a family. And
whereas Montgomery County, the state of Maryland, and the entire United States are richer for the contributions of the Korean American community.
now therefore be it resolved that the County Executive, Mark Elrich, Council President Andrew Friedson, and the entire County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland, hereby proclaim January 13th as Korean American Day in Montgomery County, and encourage our residents to join us in recognizing and celebrating the tremendous contributions of the Korean American community. Signed today on this 30th day of January in the year 2024 by the County Executive, Mark Elrich, myself, Andrew Friedson, Council President, along with Evan Glass and all members of the County Council. Congratulations and happy Korean American Day. Okay, thank you very much to our guests for honoring us with the ability to honor you and to celebrate the incredible strength and diversity in our community. I want to acknowledge Yi Shen, who's here, someone we all know very well, who does a great job as a liaison to our Asian American Pacific Islander community in the Office of Community Partnerships. And thank you to the county executive, to Councilmember Glass, for joining me in that recognition. We are now ready to move on to general business today. There are no announcements today. The minutes from the January 16th council meeting have been circulated to colleagues. Are there any objections to approving these minutes? Seeing none, these minutes stand approved. We're going to move into item number 1 on our agenda. The council is pleased to welcome several residents to interview to serve on the Advisory Commission on Policing. The Commission's mission is to advise the council on policing matters and to recommend policies, programs, legislation, or regulations with regards to policing. Each council member may nominate an individual to serve on this 11-member commission. There will be a total of 3 panels of interviews today, 2 this morning and 1 this afternoon. Before we move on to our first panel, I did just want to acknowledge the Chief of Police has announced today that he will be retiring after a 38-year career in Montgomery County Police and Public Safety. I just wanted to express my appreciation on behalf of the entire council for his almost 4 decades of service to our community, to thank his family for the commitment and the sacrifice that they have provided for us as well. We'll have many opportunities to wish him well and to express our appreciation for his service and to extend our best wishes for his retirement. But I wanted to take this opportunity, since it's late-breaking news, to acknowledge and appreciate that. Our first panel, as we move forward, of candidates are Christy Daphnis, Michael Donahue, Sean Watson, and Omodemola Williams. Please, if you can, come up to the table. We appreciate you being here. As you come up to the table, I'm going to ask a series of questions for each, with each of you taking turns who answers first. My colleagues then will answer or ask additional questions should they have them, and I'll ask colleagues just to request to get in the queue if you have questions at the appropriate time. And now that everybody is up at the table, welcome. Thank you for your interest in serving our community. Thank you for all of your efforts. The first question is, please describe why you want to serve on the commission, and given your background and experience, what makes you qualified for this position? And we'll start with you, Ms. Daphnis, and then we'll just go down the line.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here to interview today. I would like to serve on the Advisory Commission for Policing because I feel very strongly that we need to have a safe community. And in order to do that, I feel that we need to ensure that we have a well-functioning police department that is working with the community and partnering with other government agencies to create those sorts of community conditions that provide safety and provide community development and give people what they need to really thrive within Montgomery County. I feel that I'm very qualified to serve on this committee. First of all, I live in a neighborhood that has a very active police district. They do a great job. We can always do better in every aspect of our county services, and I feel like I provide that community perspective. I also have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and a master's degree in public health. And one of the reasons I went to public health school is because I feel like part of the root of crime in our society is really providing people with what they need in terms of social services and other community development. So I feel like I can bring that perspective, which is a little bit more holistic, but is still balancing some of the duties and other responsibilities that are put on all of our government agencies. Thank you.
Let's just continue going down the line. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. My name is Michael Donahue. I've lived in Montgomery County since 1978. I began my county service actually serving Montgomery County as a firefighter and an EMT. I eventually went on to work as a police officer with the city of Rockville. And then eventually I returned several years ago to the Montgomery County Police Department as a professional staff employee working out of its Planning and Policy Division. I served 20 years approximately in the federal government. During that time I worked for the U.S. Department of Justice, the United States Department of Homeland Security, and I spent a few years in the Inspector General's community working both as an investigator and an Assistant Inspector General for investigations, overseeing investigations involving waste, fraud, abuse, and misconduct. For 30 years, I was an adjunct professor at Montgomery College at Rockville. I was a professor in the Fire Science and Emergency Services program. I developed and taught courses in fire and arson investigation to members of the fire service and law enforcement community throughout Montgomery County and also throughout the state of Maryland. When I eventually returned to the Montgomery County Police Department, I served as a member of the Use of Force Review Committee, Use of Force Policy Committee, responsible for drafting the use of force policies that's currently in effect for Montgomery County. I also served as a member of the Montgomery County Police Department's body-worn camera work group, which was put together in 2016 to develop the first policy on body-worn cameras for the county, and also the training program that was launched for officers and executives as part of that. I also, during that time, was responsible for conducting workload assessments for the department to identify resource optimization, staffing recommendations, and as you know, the county, as I think you observed, as have I, has undergone a great deal of change and growth over the years, as well as the demand for public safety services, and more importantly, I think the expectations of the community as to what they actually expect from the police department. So I'm hoping that what I think is a unique perspective, background, and insight from my 40-plus years of experience, hopefully can lend itself to helping the commission and, more importantly, inform the council on these matters as they come before you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Watson, if you could just please hit your button.
Apologies.
To make sure everybody in the
My apologies.
community can hear you. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Sean Watson. My interest in serving on the advisory commission is rooted in part that I moved to Maryland approximately 15 years ago from New York City. Growing up in New York City and seeing the dichotomy between police and its residents, it kind of drove me into my profession, which I recently retired from this past August after 27 years as a federal probation officer. So I got to work on kind of both sides of it from a law enforcement aspect as well as helping individuals who were presently under supervision of federal courts. So my hopes is to kind of bridge the gap between those individuals who were under supervision as well as those who are charged with carrying out the law here in our country and specifically in Montgomery County. I'm sorry. And I just want to be able to bring an authentic approach because I have my professional experience, which kind of affords me the ability to see it from a law enforcement standpoint. But again, growing up in New York City and seeing shifts between community policing, which I found to be beneficial to other initiatives such as Stop and Frisk, which we have seen was not as successful. So just trying to learn from all the stakeholders involved, citizens, which I now am, as well as law enforcement personnel, and seeing how we could break down barriers to achieve the overall desired goal.
Greetings, everybody. Thank you for coming here. All of you as well, welcome. My name is Amadamola Eric Williams. I grew up in PG County. I moved to Montgomery County. I've been here for about 10 years. I decided to raise my daughters here. I love it here. So, what makes me a candidate, a good candidate for the ACP? With my experience, I know what's it like to be a victim of street violence. I've been robbed before, I've been jumped before, minding my business. I have that direct experience. It's traumatizing. Also, I have direct experience being a victim of police brutality. My job history with experience working. I've been an armed security guard. I know what's it like to work alongside police to protect the community. I've had supervisors that had a mindset on a vision on how to, ways to protect the community. I have my own perspective on ways to protect the community. I've been door knocking, canvassing. I ran for City Council of Gaithersburg, as some of you as may know. That experience itself was very enlightening on door knocking with the various residents, knowing their perspective, their fears, their wants, their needs. And with my experience and my overall perspective, I really want to try to bridge this gap on community and law enforcement. I want to figure out a way to get the community to build the trust again, because Montgomery County Police don't have that bad of a reputation, and I want us to be proactive and not reactive. I don't want it to get to the point where, okay, something happened. I want to get to the point where we already have this establishment trust to prevent stuff from happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. One of the Commission's primary purposes is to provide information to the Council on best practices related to policing matters. How do you determine what a best practice is, and what are some important policing practices that you'd like to see us explore in Montgomery County? How do you plan to bring to the forefront racial equity and social justice issues related to policing practices? We'll start with you, Mr. Donahue, and then Mr. Watson, Mr. Williams, and back to Ms. Daphnis. Thank you.
Thank you. Best practices are those policies, procedures, and practices that are determined through data analysis and empirical research that are adopted by large segments of the law enforcement community. Most of those are derived from organizations that actually conduct evidence-based research. Those are in our area, certainly across the country, are organizations such as the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the Police Executive Research Forum, the National Policing Institute, and also the George Mason University Center for Evidence-Based Policing. As a result of that body of research, those organizations have also developed additional follow-up recommendations, actually practical recommendations for departments to implement. Also, the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission has a body of model best policies and best practices they publish. Right now, they cover areas of policing such as community policing, body-worn cameras, and also use of force. And I think that's really, in my view, a large untapped source of information that could really benefit the police department, certainly as it informs policy and procedures and training, especially. The other thing that I think are important, and some of these topics I'll mention have been visited by the Commission before, but in my view, there's still issues that are facing most departments across the country today. These involve things like police use of force, especially de-escalation strategies. They also involve hiring, recruitment, and retention, all the challenges associated with that. These two topics are also part of the Governor Moore's proposed legislative agenda for 2024 through the GAPS Act. They are recruiting and retention, also officer health and wellness are two very important things that I think are that the Commission can do a lot of good work with. Community policing models. Most departments in the region and frankly across the country, I think, have adopted an approach to community policing that is really antithetical to the core principles of community policing. The whole point behind community policing is to establish a partnership relationship between the officers who the residents see on a day-to-day basis, who are going to be the officers responding to a 911 call. They're not the community service officers, they're not the district commanders, they're not the executives, and they're not the chief. The first person or persons that someone should want to have trust in relaying information and expecting help would be the patrol officers. And I think we need to look at officer-centric approaches, which there are many, that actually empower officers, that provide a direct ability for them to involve in problem solving, as was originally visioned when this whole idea of community policing surfaced 30 plus years ago now. In terms of racial and social justice related issues, I think, again, going back to bodies of research that have been done over the last several years, there's a Council on Police Reform and Race report that was issued last year. which was 2 years worth of effort that looked at interviews and research-based information and came up with over 50 recommendations that law enforcement agencies should consider to help bridge that divide and help provide more focused interventions and assistance to communities. And I think one of the important things to consider there is each community might have different needs and expectations. There's different cultural values, different norms, and I think that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. So I think looking at and having that communication with key community leaders to learn exactly what their expectations and needs are, and then obviously develop an intervention or a program that actually satisfies those needs. The Cato Institute and CNA has done some good work on racial equity and social justice. So I think what would be a good approach for the Commission is to actually leverage the information from this body of research and see what, if any, of those recommendations can be brought forward to actually as real programs that could be implemented throughout the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson.
Yeah, so in thinking on this question, I found myself thinking about best practices versus good practices. Sometimes we engage in good practices, what works for the moment. The way I see best practices, is can they stand the test of time? As communities change, as environments change, can these practices sustain the test of time? So that would be my view on best practices. Can we come up with solutions that will continue to evolve with communities as those communities change? I am, as a gentleman just alluded to, I'm very big on community policing. Again, I grew up in New York City where there was a time where there was community policing. I was able to see an officer who walked the beat. Everyone knew the individual. Stakeholders in the community knew who this individual was. So he or she was kind of our first stop when issues happened in the community. As we went away from community policing and that was no longer there, it was kind of, the trust was gone. Once the trust is gone, the accountability piece is gone. So I believe continuing to focus on community policing, building trust, building accountability, I think is a great step moving forward in relations between our citizens and constituents as far as the police community is concerned as well.
There are numerous policing issues, there are numerous policing challenges in Montgomery County that I feel like could be improved. One example being traffic stops. Traffic stops is like if arguably I would like to say the number one interaction with the direct interaction with police and the public. And that can be addressed on so many levels. And so I would like to look at what our neighbors are doing, policing in other jurisdictions, to see if we are really leading when it comes to policing or if they're leading. I plan on participating in police reform teach-ins, bringing everybody to the table so they all can speak, of course. And I feel like as I doing, that's what I do for a living, is canvassing as an advocate. I came across a lot of Montgomery County cops, and from their perspective, their voice, I want to say our police are over-policed. They're over-policy. There's so many policies on top of policies on top of policies for our police, and it feel like our police can't even be cops. Like they're like walking on eggshells. And so my perspective, my voice, I feel like I can have a different opinion in being part of the the APC. Thank you.
So the first part of the question, how do you determine best practices? I think some of the other candidates covered some of this really well. First of all, you need data. And if we don't have good data, we need to get better data. I know that over the past few years, there's been some, look at the data that we do have, and, maybe some adjustments might be needed in terms of developing the right data collection tools to ensure that that data is really valid. But we have to go to the data and we have to see what's actually happening if we want to change policies for the better. Research, as others mentioned, there are not just some of the resources that Mr. Donahue mentioned, but also, grant programs that are being run by OJP and even the Department of Transportation and the Department of Health and Human Services at the federal level. There are various centers that don't just focus on policing itself, but focus on some of the ancillary issues like school safety and gun violence. I mean, I think we need to look at all of these different sources of research and data. And then lastly, partnership. And this is more of an active thing, but I think you need to experiment in order to understand what some of the best practices might be in your own community. So having an openness to doing that. When it comes to equity, on top of using the data, I think that we need to really focus on workforce policies and culture, and that includes training. We need to make sure that our officers are trained well to be able to react in certain situations, not feel like that they're being, just hampered by policy, but having behavioral and role-based training that allows them to react naturally to certain situations that are presented to them in an appropriate way, and just like overall culture, it's having an expectation that it's not acceptable to behave in certain ways, and it's preferred to behave in other ways. Some of the things that I would explore on this commission are really getting a little bit deep and exploring the roles and responsibilities, and to that partnership piece, like what are some of the more creative arrangements that we could think about in terms of policing and interaction with the community. We've talked a lot about community policing on this panel, but there is a reality that there are certain situations where you do not need police and where it's not appropriate for police to be engaged. And I think thinking about those types of situations and those types of environment in the community where we have a clear distinction of where the handoff needs to be and where the partnership needs to be between various county and state bodies so that people are getting the service that we need. Not everyone in the community needs to be best buddies with a patrol officer, right? They need to have a level of trust, and they need to have a level of expectation that those patrol officers will keep them safe, but they also need to be able to rely on the fact that as a community we'll provide for them in other ways to give them what they need. And then last but not least, just workforce development. I think in order to have equity, you need diversity in your workforce. And that's one of the things I do at the federal level. We want to make sure that we have a workforce that is representative of our broad American community, and we need to do the same thing when it comes to policing in the county. And that's really, really hard. It's a hard thing to do, especially in the area of policing, because there are not enough law enforcement officers to go around at any level of government. So really focusing in on that. And then the last thing that I'll say is to Councilmember Friedson's point about the chief of police retiring. I think we're at a really important moment right now where we can really make all of these things happen. So I myself, if given the opportunity to serve on this commission, would want to focus on building that relationship with whoever comes in and creating an environment where we can share best practices without some level of defensiveness, where we can talk about what the issues are and where we can really think about what is the best active solution for some of these things moving forward, to set the environment and to set the expectation for a state within our community where police are able to do their job in keeping us all safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Our third question, how do you envision community engagement to help the ACP better understand what current Montgomery County Police Department policies and practices are effective and identify policies that warrant further examination? Start with Mr. Watson and then continue down the line.
My vision of community engagement through the ACP will help all stakeholders in breaking down barriers, stereotypes. One thing I found as a federal probation officer, when I would initially had my first meeting with a person under supervision was the role that each one of us played. And most times it wasn't complimentary when they thought about the probation officer. I typically take that opportunity to, again, and we've all used this word today, establish trust, establish accountability. Not only are they accountable, but I'm accountable as well. And I think community engagement, having authentic conversations with people, representation, it matters. For the people that you're serving, for them to know I'm also accountable just like you are, I think is important. And I think through education, learning each stakeholder, the role that they play, what they bring to the table, how they can help invoke change, I think is important. And I think the diverse representation that this commission will offer will allow for us to achieve that goal.
I would like to look at impacted areas and partner with nonprofits to conduct outreach to create, or more so address, policies that center the wants and needs of the community first. I feel having direct interactions with the public in community events, forums, teach-ins, being in a shared space is one step of many steps. Coming from different walks of life, we have people who are, federal employees, state employees, ex-law enforcement. I feel like that's diversity right there. We should have people who came from literally being homeless and working with homeless people, such as myself, working with people who have a lot of economical challenges, because with data from the OLO report, there is chances that coming from a impacted community, struggle communities, is where crime tend to flourish. So growing up in that community, you should have that insight on the approaching it the best way possible, because you don't want to mess this up. And thank you.
So when it comes to community engagement, I strongly believe that you have to meet people where they are. I know that many of you also strongly believe that, because I've seen you hold town halls on various topics and really get out into the community. I think even going beyond that and making sure that we're engaging not just in person in various parts of the county, but also via social media and some other ways, within the bounds of the law and what's required in various aspects. I think that we can also do a better job of making sure that we're reaching out to youth in our community, a very important voice that is often not as heard, and some of those other marginalized communities within Montgomery County that might not understand how the council meetings work, or might have some language barriers or otherwise. So I would definitely put it very high on my list to figure out a community engagement plan, as I've done on other committees that I've served within the county. Thank you.
Thank you. To pick up on that, I think one of the things that would be very, very good to actually revisit and recommit to is the 6 pillars of 21st century policing that were part of the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing issued back in 2015. Although those are coming up to be 9 years old now, I think there's still a lot of departments that haven't fully embraced those pillars. There's a lot of good work that's been done across the country for agencies that have actually developed their entire community engagement, community policing program, and virtually all the department operations around those 6 pillars, which I think is a very good blueprint to use going forward, especially given the challenges. And I'll put my police planner hat on for just a quick second. I think police planning is probably one of the most undervalued, underappreciated segments of law enforcement in terms of operations. There's so much value, I think, planning puts into the process. Virtually everything that's been talked about today and will be talked about going forward, if it's not grounded in some type of plan, it's very hard to measure the success or failure of anything unless there's some plan that actually has goals, objectives, strategies, measures, and outcomes attached to it. Because why else would you manage a program or try and manage a program without those elements into it? So I think if you look going back all the way back to strategic planning, especially the department's last strategic plan covered fiscal year 16 to 20. And as far as I know, I left the department 4 years ago. So as far as I know, there's no current activities associated with issuing a new plan. But in terms of community engagement, if you look to agencies such as Baltimore City Police Department and San Francisco has done a very good job with this as well. They actually developed a very comprehensive community policing plan that covers all aspects of every facet of their operation and how those operations specifically relate to increasing community policing, community engagement across all the diverse communities within those cities. So I think we can learn a lot from that and use those as a blueprint to see whether any of those approaches especially. And what I find too is there's a lot of good work being done. Youth was mentioned, and I failed to mention this a while ago with one of the questions, but I think the rise in youth-related crime, youth violence, gun violence, right, especially in this region, I think there's a lot of work, good work that can be done. There's a lot of partnerships with faith-based organizations and youth sports and recreation. I think that's not being leveraged very well. I think that will certainly help in that regard. And I think when you look back at community policing, one of the core principles is something called organizational transformation. I think that really critically looking at and evaluating the current delivery of how we do community policing and engagement in the county, I think will benefit and hopefully produce something that is actually considered transformational, which I don't really see as happening at the present time. Thank you.
Thank you. My fourth prepared question, are there any conflicts of interest that you are aware of, and do you have the time to commit to serving on the commission? Start with you, Mr. Williams.
I have no conflicts of interest. I came from being an armed security guard, working alongside law enforcement, to stepping into the advocacy space and being a community advocate. I'm of many spaces in the nonprofit sector. If one of my spaces involve police reform, that's not what I'm part of. There's a difference between police reform and police accountability. People rope that into the same thing. It's not the same thing. We have to lead through education. Education is the only way. Oh, well, I don't want to keep going. No, I don't have no conflict of interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Daphnis.
I have no known conflict of interest, and since I was on the last iteration of this committee, all the lawyers of my employer have taken a look at that very closely, and I have the time to commit to this and already completed the Citizens Academy. So, all good.
Thank you. Mr. Donahue?
Thank you. Whether this is or isn't, I'm sure someone more well-informed than I will point this out, but I'm in my last year of serving as a member of the City of Rockville's Community Policing Advisory Board. My term ends next year. In terms of my time, I work from home. I'm currently working and providing services for a federal law enforcement agency in the area doing policy and planning. And so my schedule and flexibility is such that I can dedicate the time necessary to attend any training or attend any meetings that might be required to do so as a member. And I look forward to the privilege, actually, of helping the commission and the council be successful in their endeavor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Watson.
Picking up the rear. Currently, I have no known conflicts. As I indicated, I recently retired August of this year, so I have nothing but time on my hands.
Sounds good. Nothing but time is good. We appreciate it. All right, I have some colleagues in the queue. Let me turn it over first to Councilmember Lukey, and then I have Councilmember Jawando and Councilmember Katz. If other colleagues wish to get in the queue, please do so now. And let me turn it over to Councilmember Lukey.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I have a question, and if you are familiar with the model I'm going to reference, each talk about what you think is an effective method of problem solving from a law enforcement perspective. And if you are familiar with the SARA model of problem solving, which involves scanning, analysis, response, and assessment, you can comment on it in that way. If not, please choose your own words, but talk about how you envision positive police-based problem solving in the community. And we can start, I guess, wait, what order were we in? Who goes first? Council President. Okay, Mr. Williams.
Like I said, it starts with education and also and respect as well. You don't always have to be intimidating. Police automatically is a presence of protection, and so when you push that boundary, it turns in it gets hostile, and we don't want that. We want it to be safe. We want this interaction to be as safe and as an operation as possible. So these models just do the right thing. Not every resident is aware of their rights, their constitutional rights. Just do the right thing as a cop. You know everything. You have you can call for backup, and that's my response.
I was not familiar with it, but I just Googled it. So, and actually, in the first page that came up, I think it's very well aligned with the philosophies that I had mentioned in my opening question. Scanning, analysis, response, and assessment is counter to what it replaced, which was problem-oriented policing, where it was very much more reactive. And I think, thinking about how do we turn to more of a prevention model and providing services in the community and providing police and others with the tools that they need to do their job and to help prevent crime versus just reacting to it is very well aligned with my own personal views and approach to crime and policing. Thank you.
I love Sarah, although my wife's name is Peggy. And I'm very familiar with it, and I don't think it's actually used very well, especially when it comes to problem-oriented policing. I think ultimately that is going back to what I said earlier about this officer-centric and empowering officers to be the people that actually develop the solutions and help implement them. Because I think that right now we're in a situation where I think there's a disconnect and almost a barrier being put up to go through that whole process and fully embrace it. And I think, we've all heard about surveys that are sent out, and we expect to get feedback and to learn about what the community and residents' needs are, and very seldom do I think we get a good representation of that. So I think actually the best people that know what's going on in the community, the people that live there, obviously, the officers, presumably, that respond to calls there every day. So I think the more we can do for them to be engaged in that process and collecting what I consider probably be the best first-hand information, and be able to then take, based on those that information and the input of the residents, be able to develop a plan that can go forward. Because again, I think each community within a county might have different needs, expectations of the department, and I think that certainly using a model such as SARA, I think, does go to be able to formalize that process, regardless of what fancy acronym name you want to give it. If it's not being done, that's a problem. At least if it's done, you call it something else, and might not check all the boxes, but I think regardless of that, some kind of formal plan and approach to get to that problem-oriented policing objective, I think, is probably something we should visit. Thank you.
To Mr. Donohue's point, he made a very salient point that I do believe that sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And again, the people who are going to inform you on that are the people who are in it. Getting that information from residents, from the community, will then allow us to plan appropriately and put things in place to attack that problem.
Thank you. Okay, let's turn it to Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. Thank you all for applying and for your interest and your service to the county in various ways. I have the same question for each of you, and I'll try to be concise. It was mentioned earlier, the role of policing has changed over time, right? And if you start in the South from the initial slave patrols, right, to getting a cat in a tree, right, like in dealing with someone with homelessness or mental, it has changed and expanded dramatically, particularly in the last 40 years of what police are expected to do. Are there things that you think police shouldn't be doing? And if so, do you think that expansion has been too broad? And are there specific activities you think police should not be asked to do primarily? And if so, could you give an example of those? And if you don't think that, say that too. But the premise of the question is there's been a dramatic expansion. That's a fact. Do you think that's an appropriate expansion? And if so, explain why. If not, what should police not be doing and how should we be handling it in other ways? And we can start with Ms. Doffins.
I think it is a fact that policing has expanded, and I don't know that it has been intentionally done in a way that that is inappropriate. However, there are definitely some areas where I think we could pull back. One of those is, and it's more about increasing things in other dimensions. So one of those areas is automated traffic enforcement. You have probably all heard me talk about automated traffic enforcement in other contexts, and I believe we need to do more of it. We need to do more of it because it is unbiased. It is something that really gets at the purpose of traffic enforcement, which is safety of our roadways. And so that is one area where I think police should be backing off and automation should be moving forward. I'm not saying take all of the traffic cops off the street. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying we need to shift the balance. Same goes for some of the engagements around social services and mental health, and some of the engagements that we have between police and our schools. I am not saying that police should never be in our schools, but what I am saying is that we need to think through the model of how we do that and the way that we do community engagement, and be very thoughtful about it, because there is a huge risk, especially if you don't have the right culture and training in place in your police apparatus, that could turn very bad, right? And so we need to allow police to do their job in terms of keeping the community safe and making appropriate types of traffic stops and engaging in certain in certain types of community involvement. But there are definitely areas where we can ramp up services in other ways, and create a better balance and a more appropriate balance.
Thank you. Mr. Donahue.
Thank you, sir. I would echo that and also mention landlord-tenant. On the civil side, obviously the sheriffs play a role eventually in that. Would there be a more active initial type role that could maybe benefit? And the idea being the more time you can free up the police for not responding to things they shouldn't be responding to, they obviously can focus their attention on the things they should be responding to. Neighbor disputes might be another one. A lot of the civil things that police are called to resolve, which is not really a lot that we can do. I know when I responded to those things, a lot of times I would just be referring them to other agencies for help, as long as it was an initial problem that had to be addressed, from a law enforcement perspective. Mental health was mentioned again. I know there's a bill 4323 that's looking at a CIT model, as other jurisdictions have done nationwide. So I think that the more, again, setting expectations, and I think we've heard this term holistic, which is a buzzword a lot of times, but I think in this sense it does maybe add some value where it is a collaborative effort between a lot of different agencies. County schools, I think, have a Department of Health and Human Services certainly has a role. State's Attorney's Office, the Sheriff's Department, Housing and Community Development. So I think the more we can look at their role and the actions that to inform the police what the police can and cannot do or should not or not equipped to do, is there training, extra training that might be needed to assist in that? But I agree that I think it's expanded because we're like one of the only agencies or resources that are 24/7, right? So when I was with the city of Rockville, we had called for water main breaks, bats in people's houses when our animal control officers were not working. So, and what do? We provided service because that's what we do, right? But as more and more calls for service and the more demands placed on police have increased, the question is you have to make a decision as to where's the police best use of time to have the biggest impact. So I think it's going to require a lot of knowledge and education to be able to understand exactly what other agencies' roles are, how can they help the police, and how can the police help them maybe get the best level of service provided for everyone.
Thank you. Mr. Watson.
Yes, to echo some of Mr. Donahue's sentiments, when most people get in trouble, first thing they think is to call the police, right? Despite whether or not it's within the police's purview to be able to help them. I kind of harken back to my role as a federal probation officer. I got calls some days for marital disputes, right? Individuals not getting along with their spouse, I'm going to call your PO, right? And I have to dive into that and say, well, is he physically harming you? Are there any safety issues I need to be concerned with? If not, I don't really get engaged in marital disputes. So again, it's about the training, determining the best use of an officer's time, level of expertise they can offer to a particular situation. I think once we figure out where they're better served, how we could fill in the gaps with other agencies, then I guess the overall expansion and what they're called to have to address, we can look at it a little more specifically in that regard.
Thank you. Mr. Williams.
The way the system is set up, I don't see nothing wrong with the system when it comes to policing. It's just those who enforce law enforcement. Police have to do the right thing. When one cop messes up, it blows up on social media, and now there's going to be new, bills being passed because of that one cop. That's just a rough example. We know stuff like this has happened before. I just want police to do the right thing. Police is needed. It's just that there's certain individuals who believe they're above the law. They can act up with no repercussions at all. And when there's no repercussions, that's bye-bye the accountability. And when the accountability is gone, the trust is gone with the public. And then the fear, all of that comes out again. I want to address that. I want to bring back the trust where police and the community can work together. Because I want a safe community. I know what it's like to grow up in a troubled community, and I also been in a lot of beautiful communities in Montgomery County. And I'm just trying to figure out, okay, what do we need? How do we address this? And so to answer your question, it's on the individual. Like, it's what's in your heart as a cop. You have to do the right thing. That's what my father told me. My grandfather told me. That's my motto.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Our next questioner is the Public Safety Chair, Sidney Katz.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for your interest in this very important commission. There are many areas that I think the Advisory Commission on Policing could be really helpful. But one area among those is much more direct community engagement. What to find out, what do people really want from police, and how would you engage the public? And he left, so I guess I get to decide. Who will answer the first one last time?
I believe it's Mr. Donahoe, right now? Yeah.
Very good. See, the Vice President.
I'm paying attention.
Yeah, there you go. Please, thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. It can be done through surveys. They've been tried. They don't give that information I think we're looking for. I think it's going out and doing more direct community meetings, meeting at churches, youth centers. Why do we always expect people to come to a central location and then we can't understand why no one showed up, right? Or it's not as many people showed up as we expected. That's because some people don't have transportation to get to where you want them to go. They can't afford to get here. So I think we need to go back to, and this is something else I think a lot of agencies have done successfully, citizen police academies. They're now going out and developed a series of mini police academies, and they're held at the community centers, where people can walk across the street, or ride their bike or get a ride from a friend. So I think when we go back and do that, and having a plan to ask very, very specific, I think a lot of times the questions we ask are not, we think, and this is a problem with law enforcement, we think a certain way and we frame questions in a certain way, the way we would think to answer them and want to answer them, but it's really not the best way to phrase a question to get the input you need back. So I think having more knowledge in framing the questions, and once that is done, going out into the communities and go where people congregate to get that first-hand information is critical.
Thank you. Mr. Watson.
So I believe presence is important. Presence in the community, being able to engage people in their comfortable environment. So again, going into the community, sometimes which are not the most desirable places. Again, my role as a probation officer, I saw people in the office, right? But in the office, I always got what I call the dress rehearsal, right? I had to see them in their native environment. I had to communicate with them in their native environment, with their friends, with their families, associates. And then and only then was I able to get an accurate picture of what was going on. So presence in the community, being able to have authentic conversations with people, I think will go a long way in achieving that goal, that trust, that accountability.
Thank you. Mr. Williams.
They took my answers. I don't know, because community outreach, right? That's my thing. That's what I do for a living. I work directly with residents in my community, from Gaithersburg to Rockville to Only to Brick Cheney. I partner with other organizations and nonprofits. We have our own mini community meetings. That's what I'm about. We have this open, safe space, this shared space to talk about the needs and wants of the community. And so everybody has their advantages and disadvantages as candidates. Me, that's who I am. Outreach, community, casework. And I talk to them from a human standpoint. I don't work for no agency. I'm a caseworker by heart. I do outreach. I want to know how I can help you because I know what it's like to be in that predicament. And when you have that connection with the community, it builds a better trust. And that's why I feel like I'm that bridge for to create that pillar for trust and safety. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Daphnis.
I'll echo much of what my co-panelists here have already said, and I'll add to that. I think it's right. You can't do true community engagement in a room like this, or in the county executive office building, or places where people are not comfortable, or where it's not hard to get, or where it's hard to get to. I will say one of the things that wasn't mentioned was schools. In my own community, the school is the center of the neighborhood. Every kid goes to school. In my neighborhood, they receive a lot of services from the school. There's an ability to have good communication with community members because there's some resources around translation and interpretation and other things that creates a more comfortable environment. And that's a community that my neighbors trust. They trust the principal, they trust the teachers, they trust the PTA members. And so I would kind of add that into the suite of engagement. And I will also say that while the Citizen Academy is a good idea, it's very police focused. Like, this is what we do and this is our job. And it's way up in Gaithersburg. And it was very, very difficult for me to get to 15 sessions for 3 hours. 15 weeks in a row every Tuesday night. So that's not a really great way to do it. I did it because I wanted to learn, but if you don't have that level of motivation, that's not happening.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to note that to me, Gaithersburg is not that way up there. But anyhow, just
well, it is when you're working downtown DC and you have to get there by
Christy,
6:30.
Just saying, I'm giving you a hard time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Slight difference between way up there and home. So it's all a matter of perspective, as this conversation notes. But with that, let me turn it over to Councilmember May.
Thank you. And Ms. Stephens, that's a great point, and actually something that we all just recently discussed as a body, and we agreed. So there's been some tweaks to allow for folks to be able to engage as they are best able, but also trying to make sure that folks are not going to be precluded from serving if they're unable to spend that amount of time. So I think you raise a very good point. So talking about issues of policing can obviously be very fraught. There is a wide range of opinions and perspectives, even though, especially in a place like Montgomery County, a lot of folks are kind of envisioning the same end goal and the same end community, but there's a lot of different perspectives on the best way to get there, and there can be a lot of emotions that are tied up in that. Completely understandably, lots of folks with personal experience, whether that is with law enforcement, at the hands of law enforcement, being in a community that is impacted by the criminal justice system and impacted by crime. So many different ways that people bring their personal experiences into this conversation. Could you just talk a little bit about how you see those dynamics being handled, how to make sure that all of those different voices and perspectives are able to be heard, and still come to a good place where you're able to provide those recommendations, to you take all of that and then provide those recommendations that the county is relying on you for, and making sure that marginalized voices are not being, typically disempowered voices are not being lost in the shuffle. Can you just talk a little bit about how you envision making all of that work? And I'm not sure who we're starting with this time. Do you all remember? Mr. Watson, great.
Trying to figure out how to answer that question as authentically as possible, because I think it provides perspective. Again, I have been blessed to have a 27-year career in law enforcement. I live in this beautiful county. I raised my daughter in this county. My daughter is able to benefit from specialized programs in the county, as she's currently a student in the Chinese immersion program in the county. But with it starting with me, it wasn't always like that. I tell people I come from extremely humble beginnings. I've been, I guess you can kind of say, on the wrong side of policing with regards to, as it's been said on the panel, how people police. My ability to navigate that responsibly has helped me to be at this point where I'm at now. So based on that, I feel that I have a responsibility, specifically in the supervision I've provided over the years, and just my overall interaction with people on a day-to-day basis. I think first you have to be willing to listen. Then you have to be able to not judge, because sometimes we have these preconceived notions about people before you really delve into the person themselves. My career has taught me that. For example, a conversation I would have with a person under supervision, I would look at their criminal record, and I would just ask them a very honest question. Has anyone throughout your journey, no matter how bad it's been, have they ever said to you that you've made bad mistakes or bad choices? And they say all the time. And I say, well, guess who's not going to tell you that? And they say, who? And I said, me. Well, why not, Mr. Watson? I said, because I don't want to overthink it. Because at the point in time that you made that decision, you thought it was the best decision for you. Right? Might not be a decision I would make or someone else would make, but you thought it was the best decision. Now, let's look at what you lost as a result of that. If any of the things that you've lost are beneficial or meaningful to you, and you don't want to find yourself feeling that again, you making better decisions becomes just a little bit easier. So using that perspective, I think if you just listen, try not to judge, and be open to change, it makes the process a little bit easier.
Thank you. Mr. Williams?
Wow. That reached out to me deeply. Just want to say that. So I'm envisioning a way of having transformative policing. To achieve this transformative policing, we're going to have like this space of communication, where not only residents of Montgomery County, but also the underrepresented people of Montgomery County, that class and culture of people, the immigrants, that needs to be addressed as well, because they don't have that privilege to be here or in the town hall setting to talk, right? And once everybody is at the table to talk, right, to express themselves and understand the police perspective, parenting, community involvement, working, it's like when a certain class of people is not there. There's a saying my father used to tell me, when you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so there's going to be decisions that's going to be made, and if you're not there, you don't have that chance, that option, that power. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Daphnis?
So I'll just speak to my own personal thoughts and I think reputation. I am known to be a person who is thoughtful and collaborative. I recognize that I'm a middle-aged white woman, but I don't come from a background of privilege. I was a first-generation college student, first-generation professional. I am married to a black immigrant. I have 2 black children. I live in a community of color with many children who are in poverty and who are friends with my children. And I take very seriously the privilege that I do have. And it's very important to me to be an ally and an advocate, and I take that role very seriously. And so from my own personal perspective, I feel that I am well positioned to help those voices be heard. And that is one thing that I always prioritize in any of these sorts of community conversations.
Thank you. Mr. Donahue?
Thank you. I think it goes back to a couple of important things that all of us have mentioned. That's really listening, communication, and planning. I think that if you ask most patrol officers, if they're on a first-name basis with the business leaders in their beat or their sector, who the name of the pastor is, who the resident association president is, they probably aren't, because they haven't been given up or taken time or had the opportunity to have that level of engagement. So I think the more one-on-one, the time and the strategy used to encourage that non-law enforcement, non-confrontational relationship, because I think it goes back to, you want the community to be comfortable bringing those issues forward to the person that should be the one trying to address them, and that's the person that is seen or is responding to a call for service within that community. And for every single person who expresses a concern or interest or an idea to the department, although the department may not think it's important to them. And so I think what I've tried to do is, as a professional in my career, is be very responsive to a question or a request for help. Because I would look at it this way: how would I expect someone to treat me, or how long would I expect someone to wait for a response to an email, right, or a phone call? And so I think the more you show sincere interest, and empathy and concern and follow up to that problem, give them an answer. If you don't know the answer, take 5 minutes and Google it. Call a colleague, get a phone number, the name, a link, whatever, right? The whole point is you want to make sure that you're responsive to the concerns of whoever that person is. And I think as you build that network and people have confidence that that's how their concerns are going to be addressed, I think the plans and the strategies to try and address those things can be broadly implemented. And certainly, and this has been one of the things that most agencies have recognized, have public input on policies, procedures, training. And training, I'll mention this, it was mentioned before, training is probably in education, probably two of the best things that I think can help inform and help a lot of issues that are happening, especially training for first-line supervisors. Because accountability starts on the street, and the person that's out there 24/7 with every single police officer is a supervisor of some sort at some rank. So if there's a problem, the supervisor is the first line of defense. And if they are not equipped, not trained, not concerned, don't care, then there's going to be a problem down the road. So I think that the more we can set them up for success, provide that support, and expand that, I think that will go a long way in helping implement good solutions that will hopefully address the community's concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sale.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you all for applying for this very important board. So happy to see so much interest in this new advisory commission. And so my question is about the ever evolving landscape of our county. You know, you all have so much experience. I'm sure that you've seen things that are working, that haven't worked, and you know, I'm eager to hear from you ideas that could shape our community's future for the better, to address some of the challenges we're facing, and wanted to see if there are any potential policies or initiatives that have yet to be implemented, that you would like to see implemented, or as members of this new advisory board, any recommendations you would like to propose. And I believe we're starting with Amadamola. All right.
So I've talked with a lot of cops, and from what I've gathered, they need a break. They are stressed out. They are super stressed out. They are annoyed because, again, I said earlier, our cops are over policy. With policy, there's so much policies they have to go through that when it's time to interact with someone who they deem needs to be tended to, there's so much going on. Like, they have to question themselves. And so I would think to address what to hear more from what our police, our cops are saying, and not only that, give them a space to talk where they're not going to be crucified. We're not going to be. You can't say that because you're a cop, you're law enforcement, because you know cops they're on this pedestal, and so they have to behave a certain way. And we're trying to tell them like, no, you're human like me. You know, I care for you and I care about the community. We got to work together. So yeah, that's my answer. Thank you.
Ms. Daphne.
I don't have any specific policies that I would offer up today. I think that we are in a great transition period. We're kind of in that post-COVID haze still, coming out of it. Things like community interactions and engagements feel more real at this point. And as we mentioned earlier, we'll be bringing on a new chief of police at some point. I think that really over the next year, I would want us to be very thoughtful about looking at the data, doing a scan of the environment, which some of that has already started to be done, but we should really like take a little bit of a pause. I'm not saying don't do anything, but take a little bit of a pause to make sure that the policies we're putting in place are really thoughtful, and make sure that we give whoever is leading the police department a chance to express some new ideas and some new thoughts, and to reinvigorate some of these types of engagement, because they might bring some new ideas.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think partnerships, one of the things I think could be expanded, or even as a startup, would be partnership with academia. I think there's a lot of good work that can be done, and certainly in terms of being a force multiplier, grants was mentioned, which I think is another good option to pursue. There's a lot of money out there available to jurisdictions to help support their programs. I think the youth is gun, there's a lot of good work being done now on community-based gun violence prevention, where you engage other facets of the community. I mentioned youth, some kind of youth academy, similar to a citizen police academy, but a much shorter one that really engages the youth and helps promote that relationship between the youth and the police department. So I think there's a lot of good work that can be done there. I think also there's a lot of work that can be done with the faith-based organizations, nonprofits, for example. Again, getting back to community grassroots-based support and establishing that trust that I think is important, because there's a lot, I think, of work they're doing that the police can help with and vice versa. And I think the more that communication can happen, I think, and certainly giving officers the ability to be part of that process, I think, to do that. So I think in terms of policy changes, maybe not what I would say is a policy, it's more maybe a paradigm shift to try and really go back to what I consider the basics and fundamentals of community policing. And again, looking at, based on data and experience, what are those top 3, top 5 issues in the communities, or maybe it's a trend going across all communities that need to be addressed. So I think having that relationship with other agencies in the county to be able to understand what programs are available. 'Cause a lot of times as a police officer, we're not aware of like all these programs, other agencies, right? And every day people get referred to them, but we don't know what they are. So in terms of providing a level of service that's expected, I think the more knowledgeable we are as police officers to be able to provide that service, I think will go a long way in helping everybody, I think, have that trust and respect that we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Watson.
So I don't have any specific policy initiatives that I would speak to here today. I would say education, education, education. Just as an example, I went on a field trip about a week ago with my daughter to Thomas Edison High School, and
Very fun.
through Junior Achievement, they have this place called Finance Park,
Yes.
which I thought was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, we didn't have anything like that growing up.
It brought a lot of things into perspective for all the students from various backgrounds. And I'm not familiar with the Citizens Academy that the two of you spoke to earlier, but just something in that vein where if you consider policing and all that goes into policing, how do we educate the community as a whole so that sometimes when you see police reaction to things, one aspect of the community is quick to jump to, oh, they shouldn't have done this. But if you don't have a deeper perspective as to why that reaction may have taken place, it's easy to form that opinion. So I think educating everyone across the board as to why officers may have to react in this regard, or why they don't react this way based on the circumstances, I think is important. So I think education, yes, we have policy. I'm sorry, I'm one who believe policy is meant to guide. I don't believe it should be a hard and fast rule, because sometimes circumstances may require you to somewhat deviate from that. So I think community policing in that regard is important. An individual's first interaction with a police officer, is it good or is it bad? That officer makes that determination. Again, growing up in an environment where there was an officer in the community, people knew, hey, if you were doing something you probably should not be doing, hey, I know who your grandmother is, or I know who this stakeholder is in the community. Maybe creating a diversion in that regard versus, hey, I'm just going to lock you up and take you down to the station, so to speak. So, yeah, I think education is key. Education on both sides. What the community needs are. If officers are not educated on what that is from community to community, then again, if they're just driving this hard and fast policy, they're going to have the same reaction to what might be different problems.
Thank you, everyone, for your responses. I yield.
Thank you. Our final speaker in the queue, Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you all so much for your willingness to serve. I know many of you already serve in other capacities, and your community engagement is critical because the role of this body is to be a bridge, and it's a really important one, especially now. I appreciated all of your responses to Councilmember Katz's question about how to meet the community where they are and engage, but for some segments of our community, it's even harder than that. We know that for a variety of reasons, a number of members of our immigrant community, particularly those that have documentation challenges, are reluctant to come forward regarding matters in their community. And we've worked hard for generations in this county to build those bridges, but they will once again be tested as we go into a very toxic political environment with a lot of collateral damage as a result. So how would you engage, in addition to trying to meet the community where they are, and ensure that those voices that even through their best efforts are still reluctant to come forward, and any thoughts you have on that? And I think Ms. Daphnis is first.
So I think that in particular is one reason that I mentioned school communities. I don't mean community policing in schools. I mean leveraging the school community because there is trust in those communities with people who are engaged in the school process. They know that they're not going to get turned in and all that, and we deal with that a lot in my son's elementary school as we plan things with the PTA and elsewhere. And so it's a really hard question. It's a really hard question. And I think I didn't realize how hard it was until my kids did start school, and I would have ideas and say, let's do this, and people were like, oh, you can't do that. But people are going to be really like spooked by that because of the immigration challenges. And so I also think that providing a safe space to talk about these matters, even if the police are not in the room, that's also important too. There are ways that you can create mechanisms for input and feedback, and then summarize it and relay it in different ways, through various town halls and whatnot, and provide. I think it's mostly about providing that safe space for listening, and that safe space for providing the input. And I know that I've seen you in our community do that very successfully a few years ago when we had a forum on traffic safety, and there were many, many people who came out and gave their opinions on various elements of that, and I think you can take some of those practices and repeat them.
Thank you. Whether or not this would work in Montgomery County, I'm not sure, but the Metropolitan Police Department has created what's called a Special Liaison Branch. And these are specially trained officers from different backgrounds who speak the language, number one. And then they have a series of training programs that they go through to really learn the ins and outs of the culture, the values, and the norms of the communities throughout the city. They in turn become kind of the ambassadors, if you will, that go out and directly engage with the key leaders in those communities. Through the key leaders in those communities, they can engage the residents that live there. And so there's constant communication and to help nurture that relationship, to build that level of trust so they are more comfortable. Because you're right, regardless of how many opportunities you give someone to try and tell you what some simply are not going to do that. So there's always going to be a small fringe of that. But I think by having a proactive strategy and a program and an approach to do that, and which has been very successful, and what happens is those officers then are able to bridge that gap with the patrol officers, right, that are there 24/7 patrolling those communities, to be able to be that bridge and to educate them. I think education is huge. And so I think having some approach like that, something different, very little investment probably to do, to be successful, I think would be a potential way to try and get at that and make it successful. Thank you.
Just to echo some of those points, again, education is key, informing people, but consistency. I think consistency is important. If you show up today and you say, hey, I'm here to assess your needs, but then they don't see you again. They see someone else asking the same question. right, doesn't necessarily foster trust. So I think consistency is important. Once you assess those needs, you have to deliver on those needs, right? A lot of people say a lot of things, right? But as my grandmother used to say, the proof is in the pudding, right? So if you're able to deliver on those things, then it also fosters trust. And then you start to build that partnership and collaboration that's needed so that everyone essentially wins. So I think consistency, presence, and obviously building trust are important keys to reaching that outcome.
It starts with doing the right thing. I've came across a lot of immigrant communities, and I had that talk with them. Say, hey, how do you feel about police? I don't want police. Like, then who do you call? I don't know. What are your fears? What are you worried about? And when we have that conversation, is there we can move forward. Police, they have to have this understanding of compassion and empathy when addressing people of certain culture, certain backgrounds. The city of Gaithersburg, they do a good job. I've seen police myself do their job. They don't do extra stuff. They don't say, hey, you you ran a stop sign, you have a broken taillight. I want to search your car. Get out your car. I'm gonna handcuff you. Search all this stuff. They don't do that. They do what's needed, and it's through there when you do what's needed and address the situation properly. That's a step towards trust. I want to say, and also giving resources. That's could be optional. I'm just saying that's another way of showing cops I care. I care about you. Okay, you still have to follow the law, but if you need this, if you need that, we have to talk about it. And I'm pretty sure there is trainings out there for cops to address, what am I looking at? What is the surroundings when it comes to the people of certain cultures and immigration. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yield back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you to our panel. Really appreciate your willingness to serve. The clerk will be in touch with follow-up information. We really appreciate your thoughtfulness, and we'll be in touch. So thank you very much. We're now going to move on to our second panel of candidates to consider for the Advisory Commission on Policing. I'll invite up Reverend Brian Bellamy, Christina Delane, Francisco Javier Gonzalez, and John Stevenson. Please join us up at the table, and we appreciate you being here as well. As we did with the first panel, I will be asking a series of prepared questions with each of you taking turns answering first. My colleagues, as you just heard, have some additional questions, and I will turn to them as well. I'll ask colleagues at the appropriate time to get back in the queue, although I can just go through the same order if colleagues are comfortable with that to keep it consistent. So I have that list, and I'll just go through with colleagues. If there are additional comments or questions, please let me know. Now that I see our applicants joining us here at the table, welcome. First question, we're going to start with, please describe why you want to serve on the commission, and given your background and experience, what makes you qualified to serve? Reverend Bellamy, we will start with you.
Good morning, everyone.
Reverend Bellamy, sorry, if you could just hit the button, it's on the table in front. Yep, and it'll turn red. There you go.
I have to do this every Sunday morning. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Brian Bellamy. I'm very happy to be an applicant and to be presented before you today. I am a proud citizen of Montgomery County, relatively new to the community. I've come to serve as a senior pastor of a historic church in the county. My experience includes serving as a member of the Board of Young Adult Police Commissioners in a former community, as well as having taught criminal justice, sociology, and political science in the Department of Global Studies at the University of New Haven in Connecticut. I have been pulled over plenty of times but never arrested. I also have family members, parishioners, and other loved ones that I have served as a listening ear, a counselor, who are also in law enforcement. So I have been on all sides of the equation, and I am excited about the possibility to serve the community. Thank you.
Mr. Lane, go ahead.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for taking the time to interview us today. I was previously on the PAC, which is now the ACP. I'm so glad that that happened. We were very anxious that that would not happen. So the community needs this, and we're just glad the commission is still here. So I'm glad to have the opportunity to interview, to stay on the commission. And so previously I was an educator, and in that previous life I worked with students who already at a very young, ripe age had encounters with the police community and had relationships with them. And there's not much I can do as an educator, like that's enough. And so that plate was full, so I was limited in that way. I decided to venture out. I changed my path in my career. I had my own encounters with the police on the wrong side of things. Was arrested, and so, but I overcame that. That was a struggle. That experience. I'm no different than any other individual that has had a completely different outcome from having those types of encounters with police officers, and just innately because of what I look like and where I come from, there may be preconceived notions about who I am or what I'm saying, or my voice isn't being heard the same. So when I encounter a police officer, I'm already in the defense, already nervous, right? So that's not a good position to be in. But I was blessed and covered by the blood, came out of those things unscathed, record clean, and I'm now an attorney. And so I'm on the other side of the table, which I'm so happy and blessed to be there. I don't normally work in situations in my legal capacity that encounter police officers, so this gives me the opportunity to put together my personal experience, my professional and educational background and experience, and make a real difference in this county. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk with you about my interests in serving in the Commission and my qualifications. A dedication to service and interest in public safety have been a common thread throughout my professional career, and now that I'm retired, I want to give back to my community. I will bring to the Advisory Commission 3 decades of federal service in the U.S. Military Police Corps and as a Foreign Service officer, and as a member of the county's Reimagining Public Safety Task Force. This service provided hands-on policing experience as well as reviewing policy, accountability, and potential human rights violations from a policy perspective. I attended criminology and law enforcement courses during my military officers basic and advanced courses. I personally responded to domestic disturbances and worked with refugees during the Mariel boat lift. I have honed analytical, negotiation, and communication skills in the diplomatic service, where I sought to understand our counterparts' culture, motivations, and objectives in order to advance U.S. interests. I have served in Colombia, Hungary, twice in Pakistan, in Nicaragua, and in Russia. As the director of the Office for Human Rights for the Western Hemisphere, I directed our focus on the public safety sector, because this is where most of the violations were taking place. And I also coordinated a diplomatic campaign to ensure the integrity of the Inter-American Human Rights Commission. In addition, I would contribute the sensibilities of an immigrant who was educated in New York City public schools and grew up in an underserved neighborhood. Finally, federal service brought me to the metropolitan area, and in 1990, my wife and I decided to make Montgomery our home. Since then, and except when we were serving overseas, we lived in the county, and our son has been educated in county public schools K through 12. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is John Stevenson, and my qualifications would be I serve our community. I've been a full-time minister in this county for over 30 years. over at Victory Christian Church International. Now I'm serving now as my pastor of my own virtual church. And I've worked with the community leaders on several different levels. We are currently working with the City of Gaithersburg and the Montgomery County Police with an organization called PACT, Police and Community Together. And we had monthly conversations. For the last couple of years, we've moved them to quarterly, where we bring in certain leaders in the community, police, and we just have open conversations regarding the policing here in our wonderful county. But more than just being a part of that, I've been a resident here for coming up on 49 years now. I know I look younger. I'm telling myself. But over 49 years, we moved from New York City here, and seen a lot of things. It was a culture shock for me a little bit as a youth. But we lived in an area, if you all are familiar with the county, grew up in Rockville, Viersma Road, but when we went to high school, they bussed us over to Old Georgetown Road to Charles W. Woodward High School. So we got an opportunity as a family to see just difference in the way things were done in our county. But more so for me, I want to be a part of this to help bridge that gap and help some communication. I noticed my children, I have 5 children, and my wife and I recognized some things were happening that they just never disclosed to us with their encounters with the police. And they took it as normal. We were just in casual conversation. And they took some of the things that happened to them as, oh, Dad, this always happens. You get pulled over, we got to do this happens, this is what they say, and well, it happens to everybody. And some of that happened to me as a youth, but not as much as I was hearing it from my children. And so instead of complaining, I wanted to get involved. And so in 2015, 2016, I got heavily involved with trying to bring awareness, bridge the gap in community. I noticed there are fear on both sides of the coin. And so we have to bring communication, open communication, and that doesn't happen until there's understanding. And so that's my reason for being here.
Thank you. Our second question. One of the Commission's primary purposes is to provide information to the Council on best practices regarding policing matters. How do you determine what a best practice is, and what are some important policing practices that you'd like to explore? What do you plan to bring to the forefront? How do you plan to bring to the forefront racial equity and social justice issues related to policing practices? Mr. Lane, we'll start with you.
Yes, I have notes on this one, so I don't want to miss anything. So I'm a big believer in data, and that's usable data. One of the things that we did learn while on the Policing Advisory Commission was that there is a lot of data out there, but a lot of it is not actually usable or malleable in a format that we can then take, digest, and apply. So this creates its own set of challenges. The more time that we take digging into that type of data, and I mean we as in hopefully ACP, once we dig into that, we're able to identify the type of specific data we need, what we need to retrieve, gather, compile, and what those issues are, and we're given the opportunity to then resolve them. The better part of taking that data and having the commission is having the genius of each individual on the commission. And that is a priceless contribution that is offered through the council, to the council through the commission's advisements. A lot of that does go into research, so not to get too far into the research process of determining best practices, I would definitely lean on the valuable research of working with others that are invested parties. A large part of it is having implementation of those best practices, and we're all invested and eager to employ those best practices, proven best practices. Coming from that lens, all policies, all police policies are, practices are important, excuse me. I want to make that clear. All police practices are important. There may be times within history to present time where some practices are more relevant than others, but they're all important, and we must all stay abreast to the use of force for obvious reasons. That's one practice. And this is a highly researched area, so we have the opportunity as a commission to really dig into that and stay ahead of it. It's vital to our community that the police treat everyone fairly. Consistency builds trust, and this trust is through employing the best police practices: traffic stops, community policing, recruitment and retainment. Community policing is one of my specific interests. as it can be a way to solve problems proactively, promotes social cohesion, gains trust of the community, opens the opportunity for police to truly protect and serve. These are all things that we will have on the commission to explore and advise. And it's not possible to explore any of this without delving into racial equity and social justice. The purpose of best practices is to ensure that everyone is treated fairly. In order to ensure that is happening, we must acknowledge that there are times where everyone is not treated fairly. This commission gives us the opportunity to take a closer look at these things and provide the highest qualified advisement to the council. Thank you.
Thank you. I would approach my work at the Commission with an open mind, willing to explore new concepts and to be persuaded to change my mind. As I did during my service in the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force, I would listen actively and critically and with an open mind to representatives of the county government, experts, the various communities and advocacy groups, as well as my colleagues in the Commission, to learn their perspectives and objectives. I would educate myself on the issues at hand by looking at reports from previous county efforts as well as the professional literature on public safety and outreach with the community. And I would work collegially with my colleagues to narrow differences and build consensus for our recommendations. I hope to explore how our police department applies the strategy of community policing as well as problem-solving policing and intelligence-led policing. I would also like to explore to what degree recommendations from the MCPD audit and the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force are being implemented, specifically with regards to institutional culture, data collection and analysis, and use of force guidelines. I see racial equity and social justice as fundamental to effective policing. And there is an ample empirical data produced by county government agencies and policing on policing outcomes, including MCPD's own data, that indicate that we still have work to do in this regard. What remains to be seen is whether the data collected by county agencies, and specifically by MCPD, is optimal and put to effective use. I believe that eliciting comments directly from the various sectors of our community, including in person, through surveys and other means, is essential to ground truth, the evidence and the data that we are getting from the county. In particular, it is essential that we hear directly from the more vulnerable and the less served sectors of our community, as they tend to be the most victimized by crime. I also believe that research, data collection and analysis is useful in identifying policies and procedures that could affect negatively our efforts to promote racial and social justice. Thank you.
Well, I echo what both of them said. I think that data is important. Before you can create any policy, you have to have the correct data, but it depends on where you're getting the data from and who you're talking to. If you're not talking to a specific community, and in our county, I think the youth are critical to that data because they have a very great impact and they're going to be the future of our community. And so if we're not getting the right data, and how do you get that data and get true data, you're going to have to develop relationship. You're going to have to develop trust for them to be able to come forth and tell you the truth of what's going on. And then we can properly assess that data. And then the data has to be reevaluated, in my opinion, yearly. So we can look at policy again. We are living in this technology age, and things are moving so quickly that just to leave something in place and have it there for 7 to 8 years, I don't think is effective or is conducive to what we're seeing today. As you all know, you're seeing changes so fast right now, just in the policy that you're setting, that you have to go back to the table and reevaluate what we've set and now redo some things. So I think that if there's something set up and established where we can reevaluate that data, then we're able to make headways in our county.
I echo a lot of what has been said. I'm a firm believer in not reinventing the wheel. And so if there was a proposed policy, I think that we should do the research to see if there are similar policies in communities that are similar to ours, and then we would have to recontextualize that policy for our community. That might involve putting together a small committee of law enforcement and community members to see how it would work for Montgomery County. Then we could even have a laboratory where we take a small segment of the county to implement that policy. So, for example, one policy that I'm also very interested in is community policing. I grew up in 1980s America where they told all of us, if you're in trouble, run to the police. But we know that in recent times and with national events that is not the case anymore. So if we wanted to create a model of familiar community policing, perhaps we could research other communities that have that kind of model where Officer Rick walks the street and he's our friend, and then perhaps we could vet that out with a sampling of law enforcement and community members, and then we can implement it in small doses in one or two communities to see how it works. And if it works well in some communities, perhaps we can implement it throughout the county. I do believe that change as significant as policing policy needs to be incremental and well vetted and researched. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move on to our third question. How do you envision community engagement to help the ACP better understand what current Montgomery County Police Department policies and practices are effective and identify policies that warrant further investigation and examination? We'll start with you, Mr. Javier Gonzalez, and we'll go down the line.
Thank you very much. As I noted earlier, I think it is essential for the Commission to ensure that we hear directly from all sectors, but that we prioritize the underserved and the more vulnerable and marginalized sectors, the immigrant communities. These are the sectors of our community that are most victimized by crime. And so we need to make the extra effort to reach out and hear from them, make sure that we hear from them. So it's on us, and it will be on us. And how we do that, it will be through hearings, town hall meetings, focus groups, and other forums. But whatever it is, we have to make sure that we hear from them. And this is important because we get a lot of data on public safety in the county, but we need to ground truth that data. And this direct engagement will also alert us to problems, that emerging problems, and also alert us and let us know how we are doing and how we're making progress. Thank you.
Well, I definitely believe there has to be the engagement. I guess the engagement that I've noticed lately hasn't been as effective as I think it could be. When we're talking about our police engaging our community, how do you go to certain communities and not have it looked over-policed? Why are the police here? Why are they constantly here? Are we a problem? I think that you have to create subcommittees that people trust, and you may have to compensate them, because some of the folks are not going to volunteer to be on a committee. Some will, that care about their community. But how do we engage, even with the youth? How do we get the answers and things we need to do to change them? The engagement right now is a heavy problem. I also was part of the police academy. I recommend anyone in this county to take that. I thought of ways and I asked questions of how we can continually bring that to the communities, but when you bring it to the communities, will the community attend that? So how do we get them to attend that? Again, we go back to talking to those who are in the community, what they don't understand, to bring understanding, and then you make it creative, especially for our youth. If you're not able to relate to them, they're going to be fearful, and fear results in anger. It results in problems, and we see this constantly. We've been blessed in our county not to have major things happen, but I think because we have things like this, it's a start. But I really truly believe if we have sub-liaisons in the communities that can assist, though we're here, who else is in the community that can help, that are engaged with that community?
I think that it's important for us, for the commission, for the committee to engage groups that are already in aggregate. I feel that people don't really come out in strong numbers to discuss policing until there's an incident. It's like reactive. And so that being the case, I think we would certainly have to go to some of our high schools. I can remember police officers and community members coming to my high school, and there was an open forum where we were given the mic and we could address some of the issues. And I was amazed at some of the things that my peers at that time had gone through. As a pastor, I would advocate, talking to community churches, synagogues, places of worship, and asking them to provide forums as well where you could get strong numbers of people to come out and to discuss these issues. And we've just come out of COVID, and I'm sure that you all have learned. As a pastor, I've learned the power of virtual opportunities, right? And so perhaps we can have virtual meetings where people can log in, share their concerns as well. That might be an opportunity to engage the community.
I just like to be recognized first. I was thinking about something you mentioned down there about, having over-presence of police and how that looks versus community engagement. And so, I was thinking the other day we were riding through another county, and they had those big police towers, the lights at the top. It's kind of like off-putting. It'll be in like a neighborhood or at the Home Depot. And I was like, what? But this was in a neighborhood specifically. I've seen it at the Home Depot, pretty okay with that. In a neighborhood, I was like, what is this? Where are we? This is creepy. This does not feel engaging, not the right kind of engagement anyway. I don't see too much of that necessarily. And I appreciate the way that Montgomery County's police department treats the constituents here. That has been mentioned a little bit previously by a previous candidate that was on panel 1, just the way that the police engage. And it is different from county to county. And so the work that has been done thus far, it shows itself in the way that our police officers carry and manage themselves. So how do we connect? Through various community organizations, through the churches, directly from constituents themselves. Us as part of the commission would be walking in our mission. And so we will be connecting with the community. Our eyes are open and we're looking through that lens because we have been appointed and advised to do this on behalf of our constituents. So we'll be walking with a keen eye. Having an ear to the community and an organic connection with what's going on in the community, participate in the things that are happening in the community, attending community organization meetings. It's so great to see reverends here on the panel because they're already connected to the community. And that's exactly what we need in order for this commission to be successful. Meet people where they are. We've discussed that a bit here from different candidates. And it requires community immersement. We can't be separate, like overlooking the community. We need to be part of the community to understand what's going on. Like Ms. Daphne said earlier, the schools are very much central to the community here. And that environment is one where most people find themselves trusting that environment much more. I do believe that it also requires structured meetings like this as well. There are some people that are not going to go to the fun events or whatever. They want to sit in a meeting like this and they want to have their words heard and they want it to be articulated and they want someone taking minutes and they want it recorded. And that's important to them and that feels effective for them. And it can be effective. I'm sure you find this environment effective. You're all here. So this is also needed. We must have both so we can reach everyone in our community. Immersement is really the key here, connecting with the community, listening to the community, being in touch with the community organizations, the churches, the schools, getting to know the leaders in the community, especially the immigrant community. We may have language barriers, but we are not all buried from each other. There are people within the community that can speak for our behalf through us. We can use them in order to bring that community cohesion and social cohesion together. So thank you.
Thank you. My final prepared question, are there any conflicts of interest that you are aware of, and do you have the time to commit to serving on the commission? And we'll start at Reverend Bellamy. Oh, sorry. We'll start at Mr. Stevenson. I skipped ahead. I apologize.
That's quite all right. At the current time, no, not for me. Right now, my wife is retired. I am self-employed, and we've got grandbabies. So we're loving life right now, and that's a different kind of love. But we're not here to talk about that. But right now, I have I'm available to serve. I'm always available to serve. It's just the scheduling, and we're here.
Thank you. Now, Reverend Bellamy.
There are no conflicts to my knowledge, and I do have and would make the time available to be available and to serve. I see this as an extension of my service to God and to humanity.
Thank you, Ms. Lane.
No, I have no conflicts, and I just want to thank the council. And if you appoint me onto this commission, I'm going to make sure that you found your vote to keep this commission going, worthy and valuable. So we will prove our worth. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm retired, so I have no impediment to committing to all the time and effort required to serve in the commission, and I'm prepared to take any and all training that might help me to contribute to the commission. I've done some volunteer work, and I do it in our neighborhood, but I'm not formally associated with any community organization that works with the county, nor am I associated with any group that deals with any of the issues that might come up before the commission. Having said that, I have partnered and worked collaboratively with civic and advocacy organizations throughout my career, and I would like to continue to do so at the commission. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it to colleagues. I have council members Lukey, Juwando, Katz, Mink, Sales, Albornoz in that order. Let me know if I miss anybody, but with that, let me turn it over to Councilmember Lukey.
Thank you. So I asked the previous question, previous panel, more coffee needed. Previous panel, this question. There is a problem-solving model or an analytical model used in law enforcement called the SARA model of problem solving. If you are not familiar with that, you can ignore that I called it that. But what I want you to each discuss is what you view as a positive and collaborative way of problem solving involving law enforcement. And I guess we could start with Reverend Bellamy.
Very good. I'm not familiar with that model. However, I think that it is critical in problem solving to come to the problem, creating a framework of objectivity where you are open to hearing all sides, that you listen intensively to all sides, ask all critical questions, allow some time to think through the issues, have conversations with colleagues to hear their perspective, and then to come together with a mutually agreed upon solution.
Thank you. Ms. Delane?
Yes, I'm a big advocate of proactive work. That's part of what this commission is also could be set up to do as well, where you have these conversations with the police department and officers and things that they may be facing. I think it's important when you're collaborating with the police department to lean on their expertise. They know their problems. We see it from the outside, and that's part of what we're there to do, to be able to identify things that while they're in the trenches, they may not be able to see. So the police department would also need to be open to that type of expertise. We're on the outside looking in. Here are some problems that we see arising or that may be actually currently happening. And while they're immersed in it, we're not seeing what's happening right there at their feet, and they can bring that to us. And us being able to all discuss those things collaboratively together in one space will lend all the expertise from all angles. So I think that the biggest thing is being able to understand that we're all going to see the problems from different perspectives, and we may see things that the others do not see. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gonzalez?
Thank you very much. Throughout my entire career, we focused on problem solving. You identify the problem and you try to solve it, and if you don't, many times, particularly in diplomacy, you don't get to solve the problem, but by the time you leave the job, you've made it better. You've made an improvement. And so that's my focus. Focus on what are the major problems and then deal with them. And I would deal, as I've done always, cooperatively and trying to reach consensus and narrow differences. My service in the military police put me in the front lines of law enforcement. And through that, I learned several lessons. And I learned the importance of empathy, compassion, transparency, and accountability. And I think that's very, very important. So I think what I would like to do, I also learned how easily it is for a situation to go wrong. Even when you have the best intentions, things can go wrong for you as a police officer and for the citizen. And so with that understanding, I think we need to work collaboratively and have a dialogue with our colleagues in the MCPD, and we hold ourselves accountable, but we also need to hold them accountable. Thank you.
I believe we need to assess why is there a problem? Why does a problem exist? And assess what we can do from that perspective. For example, if there is a communication problem in the communities with the police, then most likely that's probably because of lack of understanding. And how do we solve that? So I think if we can assess what the problem is and start from there, then we can begin to work on how to solve the problem. And the answer to a problem in one community may be a different answer somewhere else. And so I think if we can assess what the reason, why do we have the problem, then I think we can work from there to solve the problem.
Thank you. I want to thank you all. And actually, Ms. Delane referenced something in one of her answers that was exactly this kind of an issue about the cameras, for example. So that may not be the solution in all communities, but in one minority community in my district, an HOC property, that's what they called us to talk about. That's what they called us to ask for. And that's what we got them because that's what they wanted, right? But that may not be right for another space or place, or for even the problem that is attempting to be solved. So thank you. I appreciate all your answers.
Thank you, Councilmember Jawanda.
Thank you, and thank you all for applying. Thank you for your continued service, Mr. Delane, or your hopeful continued service, and for all the work that you all have done in our community. And welcome to our community, relatively new. My question will be the same one I asked the last panel. Over the last 40 years, the role of policing has dramatically expanded to include things like schools and mental health and people experiencing homelessness. There's a view that I share that I think we've asked them to do too much, and that they should focus on violent crime. Do you agree with that view that we've asked police to do too much? And if so, what are some examples of areas where you think we might need to reevaluate? And if you don't agree, you can certainly say that and explain your position as well. And I think, Ms. Delane, I think we're starting with you.
Thank you. And I believe that you have memorialized that through the STEP Act, right? And so the previous commission wrote a formal letter, so I'm going to keep my comments kind of short and brief so that I don't, as a representative at the time that was written, overstep or misspeak or misstate or misrepresent. All of the misses I don't want to do. But I will say this, that the police are commissioned to do a lot of things. I even mentioned as a teacher, like adding anything to that plate was going to be like overwhelming. So I can only imagine in my wildest dreams the type of pressure that police officers have when we are saying we also want you to work with this very specialized group of people that are suffering from mental illness. And we also want you to work with this very marginalized group of people that are suffering from homelessness. Right? And then we want you to also be great with the kids. Like, this is a lot, and we do have violent crimes and domestic violence and very serious things that the police needs to be super trained on. Maybe that's where their training time should go and things of that nature. Each community is different. This takes me back to community policing. You will know the needs of the community you are in when you're immersed in it. Every community, as you just mentioned, will not need the big police tower. So therefore, it shouldn't be there if it's not going to promote community engagement and social cohesion. So if my community has a high rate of mental illness, and I know this from my community policing, then that's the kind of programs and services that I would be well versed in, because that's the needs of the community around me. And I think that's a way to meet in the middle, because the police officers are tending to be there when these things are happening. So we want them to have some tools in their toolbox, something that they can reach back to so they can be resourceful, protected, and safe themselves. But the biggest thing is, so maybe not burdened with everything, learn every program, a previous candidate sitting here said something that there's a lot of programs out there that I didn't even know about as an officer. He said something to that effect. And that's a big thing. I mean, I don't know all the programs that Montgomery County, every time someone mentions something new, I'm like, wow, that is very cool. That is super awesome. This county is just continues to grow into the amazing things that this county has to offer. So to put that burden on a police officer to know everything is quite burdensome. But if we continue to work around this community policing, we continue to grow and develop in that area, the police officers will be well versed and should be well versed in the needs of that community they're in. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, probably the police are doing too much, but they are first responders. So the police get called in and they encounter a situation where people are in crisis and they need help, and the police needs to address it. So what we have to do, and I hope what we can do in the commission, is develop recommendations on the ways that we can take off the load of the police, the way that we can facilitate the police as first responders in dealing with crime and helping prevent crime. My concept of policing is policing by consent, where the community selects a body from its community to protect them. And so the purpose of the police is to serve the community. And that's the only purpose. Right. And the purpose of the police is to serve the community the way the community wants it to serve. And so what we have to take ownership of that and work with the police to figure out what are the things that we really want them to do, and how do we help them do it well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stevenson. Pastor Stevenson.
Thank you, sir. Absolutely, they're doing so much, and I applaud. I have friends that are police officers, and there's a lot being required. Maybe some of y'all old enough to remember cartoons when they called the fire department to come get the cat out the tree, and that's something that doesn't happen anymore. I don't think it happens, but the police are being asked to go into the schools and be school resource officers, and I think there's been discussion for some years regarding that and their role and the definition of what they're supposed to do there. But there's a lot being asked, and I think that we can look at what's going on in our county to assess what's the need, what's the real need. As a citizen, I want to feel safe. I want to make sure that when I call the police, they're on the way and they're not dealing with another situation where I know they have to deal it. And I think the dispatchers are key of how they redefine what a situation is. They're the go-between. So if they can assess, if you go to a hospital and you're sitting in the emergency room, you're like, how come no one's seen me yet? It's because there's someone that had a heart attack and you've got the flu, so we're going to get to you, so they prioritize. I think that needs to be assessed. Can we prioritize where our local police go? But we need to start looking at what are we asking our local police to do that might not be a policing job. What is it that we're asking them to do? Do I think we need them in the schools? My personal opinion, yes and no. I think that there could be some aspects of that, but I don't think we need our police to always be in our schools. I think it helps with some things, but why are they there? Are we looking at our children being policed? I think the original point was the school shootings. So are we using them here, and now there's something going on here, and we don't have enough as it is, to my understanding. The applications for police are low, and some of the police are retiring early. There's great concern for not having enough police officers right now. So now we have to look at what are our current police doing and prioritize what they do until we can resolve not having enough officers.
Thank you. Reverend Bellamy.
I'm in firm agreement that we ask officers to do a lot. Some of what they are called to do
requires a master's in social work or other kinds of graduate training. However, I appreciate all the responses of my fellow candidates. They are first responders, and so they do need to be trained to respond to any kind of situation. I think that we can best support law enforcement officers by also making sure that they are armed with all of the follow-up resources in order to redirect persons who get involved with law enforcement because of the fecundity of issues. And another potential answer or solution to this is that perhaps there can be specializations for the officers, where perhaps there is a group who are specialized in, for example, dealing with the homeless or those with mental illness, which is very often intersectional. Perhaps they have some extra training to deal with those groups before redirecting them to long-term resources. But absolutely, we do need to figure out the best way to support our officers in trying to address all of these issues that may be out of their wheelhouse.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilmember Jawando. Let me turn it to Chair of the Public Safety Committee, Councilmember Cat.
Thank you all very, very much for your interest in this important commission. I too am going to ask the same question that I asked of the other panel, and I will ask it again for the third panel. And some of you have already touched on parts of this, but there are many areas that I think the Advisory Commission on Policing is going to be most helpful and continues to be most helpful. One area among those is is how we're going to have more direct community engagement. We need to ask directly, what do people really want from the police, and once you know that, how would you engage the public to find out that information? And I believe Mr. Javier Gonzalez, you're up for first on this one, please.
Yeah. Well, actually, thank you very much, and thank you very much. This is the first time since coming to the United States where I'm addressed by my middle and last name, and that's the way I grew up. Back at home, I was always known as Javier, not Francisco, but when I came to the United States, Javier turned out to be a very difficult name to pronounce. So, and you guys did a great job, so thank you very much. The community engagement, I think, is critical, and we, as I've mentioned before, I think we should, the Commission should prioritize reaching out to the sectors of the community where that it's suffering most from crime. Let's focus on let's prioritize the problem areas and try to, and I think the major advantage of community engagement is not only establishing a dialogue and fostering a healthier community, but it's also understanding the underlying causes of the problems that we have. And so what I have found throughout my career is that you need a sort of holistic approach where, yes, you have formal meetings, you have more informal meetings, and it is often, as I found, when you build a relationship, and when you are not in a sort of a formal environment, that you actually have a much more frank and honest and unrestricted dialogue. And this is where we get the ability to get new perspectives and get new ideas and really get into and find out what are the underlying causes of our problems and what are the possible solutions to our problems. So that's my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe to create incentives to acquire more service from those who represent those communities. If there's a way we can get more of the communities we're talking about serving, and we're finding some challenges in to be on the police force or to be engaged and work in some kind of collaboration with the police, I think that helps with the engagement. If you come to my community and you really don't understand me, it's hard for us to work together when you don't understand my emotions, the things that have gone on, what I see on a day-to-day basis. And so if you can find and locate and incentivize the people who live in those communities to want to be involved with law enforcement, where they can make a difference, their voice can be heard, I think that you'll find that the engagement becomes a little bit easier. Often, we're mentioning in churches that I'm probably talking against the church, I'm finding that some folks are just not engaged with the church anymore like they used to be. They don't trust it, they don't trust religion, and so the church is one place, but it's not as strong as it used to be. So you need to find a way to get into the community and find those stakeholders and engage with them. And there are influencers in the community. If you can get them involved with what goes on as far as our police, then you have the buy-in. Then you have the influence. Now you have the engagement. You have the trust. And I think we can start making a difference from that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Community engagement is so critical. I made the allusion to a prototype earlier of Officer Rick, but I grew up in a neighborhood where we knew 2 or 3 of our police officers, and they were our friends, and so creating that familiarity was important, right? But as far as engaging a larger group, so I serve as pastor of Mount Calvary Baptist Church. Which you could see from here if it weren't for trees, right? And every year we host a national night out. Last year there was an excess of 600 people. Some of you were there to pass through. Creating those kinds of opportunities where people can come together in a relaxed environment, and where they are, where the children are having fun with the police. My daughter looks forward every year to getting on the police boat, right? That is a beginning of engaging people, because again, you're going to get a crowd. This auditorium would be full if an incident had happened and people were reacting. But I think in order to be proactive, you are going to have to create an environment where people want to come, and so that is an event where there's a community event where there is fun, where there is the opportunity. Excuse me, where there's the opportunity to engage with law enforcement, and then there is a space to address concerns directly with police officials. With regards to, thank you so much, you're so kind. With regards to the root causes of crime, I think some research needs to be done there. What we found at our church in serving really this neighborhood on the other side of 355 is food insecurity is a huge issue. Housing is a huge issue. And so in the ways that we can, we try to help with that. But perhaps the forum does not need to be on community policing. Perhaps it needs to be on some of those issues, and the police are present to also address those issues as well, to have some kind of buy-in into the larger issues of the community, which bleed into causes for criminality. So that's just a few things.
Thank you. Ms. Delaney, please.
Yes, thank you. So I've been searching for this phrase, this saying, ear to the ground. It just escaped me before I sat down here, and so now I've got it, and now I've got to go back and research where exactly did this come from. Anyway, I think having your ear to the ground is the biggest thing, and having connections. Like, I don't have my own church, but I do now have relationship, some sort, with Reverend Bellamy, fairly new. We'll get to know each other, and building that type of connection with the church leaders, community leaders within Montgomery County is what will give me that connection and have my ear to the ground and allow me to be part of the community, engage with the community. Being part of the commission is no secret. Right? This commission is a mission, so I'm walking around with this as part of who I am. I'm sure, like, even as the councilwoman mentioned, you got to get to know the community around you. Some communities feel safe with the police tower. Some communities feel like that's an overpresence with the police tower. So it just depends, and knowing your community is essential to being able to address those needs. So as the commission being a mission, engaging with the public is making sure that that's known. This is part of what I do. So when you see me at a community event, it shouldn't be the first time, it won't be the last time we're going to see each other again. And if there's something that you know is going on when it comes to policing matters or policing practices, you know, oh, that woman there is on that commission. I can go talk to her. Thank you.
Thank you. And just as an aside, it's my understanding that the expression ear to the ground came from when they were listening to the ground when the horses were coming for the various armies coming towards them. That was what my understanding. Not that I ever did that, but anyhow, thank you very much.
I think several of us were waiting for Councilmember Cass to explain how he used to do it when he was younger, but I appreciate that. We always appreciate the breadth of knowledge and lived experience that you share with us. Let me turn it over to Councilmember Mink.
All right, thank you all. Thank you all so much for putting yourselves forward again in some cases and for a great conversation here today. The question that I'm going to ask, as a number of you have touched on already in other questions, so feel free to take it whatever direction you want. We're trying to be consistent with our questioning, obviously. So when we talk about policing and public safety, it can be obviously a very fraught issue. There are many people with different emotional ties to this issue from personal experiences that cover a wide breadth of a wide range of what those could be. So how do you navigate that, working together as a commission, working with the community to come together to be able to present recommendations in the way that the county would be relying on you to do? How do you make sure that the voices that tend to be most marginalized or most disempowered, how do you make sure that they don't get lost in the fray? How do you balance all of this? It's a very difficult task, so would love any of your thoughts on that. And we're starting with Mr. Stevenson.
Thank you. I think the key is for the commission to be well versed in everything that's going on. It's our responsibility to know what's happening, what the policies are, what changes there are, so that we can make proper assessment for the community. If we're going to be the liaison and we're going to come and serve you all here, that you have a proper assessment, that we're giving you what's the pulse of what's happening, and we can't do that if we're not aware of what's going on in policy, what proposals are coming up for the changes, as well as some of the emotions and some of the things that are taking place. Be aware of what's going on in the news, because that has a major effect on how people shift. I said incredible, some of the things that I hear some people talk about that have no basis. They saw it on social media. I saw it on Facebook, and they're quoting things they saw online, and so now that becomes their reality. So you have to have someone that can be able to balance that, and you can't balance that if you're not aware, you're not educated. So it will be the responsibility of this commission to kind of teeter and know everything here so that we can bring a proper resolution and communicate that in a way that is understanding on both sides.
Thank you. Reverend Bellamy?
Okay, so here's the Baptist preacher in me. I have to share a story. So several years ago, it was a Wednesday evening. I taught Bible study. This was in another community. I taught Bible study, and I was driving home. It was about 9 o'clock. And I saw whirling lights behind me. And I said, uh-oh, somebody's going to get got. And after a while, the lights were right on me, and I said, oh my goodness, I got. So I pulled over, and I waited for what seemed like an eternity. And 4 other police cars with whirling lights also came, and they all surrounded my car. And so finally, with all the police cars there, one of the officers came and tapped on my window. I rolled the window down. I asked, how can I help you, officer? He looked at me, he looked in my car, and he said, your lights are not on. Now, I had just gotten one of those cars with the bright panels, and it was so lit up in my car, it was like Vegas, that I didn't realize that my lights were not on. But that police officer was afraid of me. I've never been in a fist fight, but he was that afraid of me that he waited for 4 other cars to come and give him support.
As a black American man, I was incensed, but as a pastor, I had sympathy for that man because he did not know what he was going to encounter, and he had to be very afraid of me, but very afraid in order to do what he did, right? And so I think a goal of this commission is to be able to operate in that duality where you can identify with the marginalized, but also understand the critical, very often life or death work that people in law enforcement have to commit to, and then we have to operate in, I believe it's Dostoevsky, behind a veil of ignorance, right? Where we are ourselves, but we are not ourselves, and we can hear everything that's happening, and then come together with a solution that best meets the goals of justice and equality and fairness. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lane?
Thank you. I wonder if the police knew that you were also frightened by that. If the police still remember that they also elicit fear in some of their constituents. And so just to remind myself of the question, balancing people's different experience, where people are coming from, their emotional ties to the police, and their relationship with the police. And so, to borrow from some famous words of a famous comedian, Cat Williams, I cannot narrate your experience with the police. So therefore, I have to understand that wherever you are coming from, whatever experience you may or may not have had could be completely different from mine. Or it could be the same within one person. Myself as an example, I'll tell a story too. That's just my southern ties telling the story. So when I was younger, I went to New York City. It was a big deal coming from the South. You're all excited. New York, now just take the train, you know. But it was a big deal, the lights and everything. And New York police are like world renowned, okay? So to me, they are like famous. You know, I'm watching NYPD Blue, I'm watching Law and Order, and I'm like, this is, so they have the car, they're standing outside the car, they're looking cool. I'm like, I'm with my friends who are of color, and I'm like, one of you've got to take a picture of me with the police, right? So this was like, what? Are you crazy? But from my experience at that point, you all heard my story earlier, life goes on. But at that point, I was like enthralled with the police. I was like, they were like celebrities to me. They were there for me. I came from a community where we knew the police officer at the rec center and all of these things. And so that was my experience at that time. Later in life, and I still have residual with the police lights. You know, I was arrested, handcuffed. The police were not listening to me. All of a sudden, I wasn't heard. These people that I looked to, respected, honored, revered, weren't listening to me at all. That's a totally different experience. And so having both of those experiences within myself as an individual, and now being an attorney on top of that, gives me the opportunity to recognize my experience is not your experience, and I have to be open, completely, ears, mind, body, spirit, soul, to your experience in order to be able to help you and to combine and to bring the social cohesion that we're looking for with the police and the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Javier Gonzalez.
Thank you very much. You're quite right. Public safety, and particularly in this country, it's fraught. And I think a lot of it has to do with our traditions and customs of how we conduct policing, particularly in this modern age. And the one thing that I took from my personal experience in law enforcement is how every time I ended up either supervising an arrest or responding to a domestic disturbance, is the compassion that I felt for the people that I was dealing with, because they were in crisis. And that was my experience, and that's the experience that I took to the Reimagining Public Safety Commission. When I reached the commission, I approached my work with an open mind. And I must admit that I changed my views on some of the cases, some of the issues that we dealt with, and I wasn't quite comfortable with some of the recommendations that were discussed, but we discussed it collegially and rationally, and that helped me understand the different perspectives, and I also I also ended up supporting a lot of things that initially I was a little bit reluctant or skeptical about. The other thing that I did was we tried to build consensus to realizing that what we had to do was come up with a set of recommendations, useful recommendations for you or for the council. And so that's going to be the priority, and trying to focus on trying to come up with a better set of recommendations that will have an impact on law enforcement, on public safety, and improving our community and addressing our goals of racial equity. And so that's what I want to do, and I will work collegially and try to come up with a better set of solutions. And some of them I will be very happy because I think that I fully support. Some of them I may be a little more skeptical, but in the end, I know that no one is perfect and no one is all-knowing. So we work as a team and try to come up with the best product for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Sale.
Thank you. Thank you all once again for applying to be a part of this commission. My question will also be the same as the last four panelists, applicants. And so in this constantly changing landscape of Montgomery County, we have, I believe, 4 now of the most diverse cities in the country. And we are a majority community of color, and so as we're looking towards the future and how important the role is of the board members, there are many policy initiatives that have been implemented across the country that remain untapped. And really excited to explore new policies and initiatives right here in Montgomery County. And so with a new board, I'm eager to hear about any policy initiatives that you believe would be beneficial to come to Montgomery County should you be appointed to this new commission. And we're going to start with Reverend Bellamy.
Thank you very much. If it was handheld, I'd be fine, right? Thank you very much. I'm very interested, as I've shared previously, in models of community policing. I live in Gaithersburg. I pastor in Rockville. We just purchased a house in Germantown, so I'm all over the 270 corridor, right? Very seldom, and perhaps because our county is largely suburban and rural, very seldom do I see police officers casually coming together with members of the community. And so I think we need to research counties that are similar to ours that have been able to navigate that space. As you have shared, our county is very diverse, and it is very important that that every citizen sees every law enforcement officer as someone who is there to support having a peaceful community, having a community where all of our children can thrive, to kind of dismiss the narratives that have been created behind the incidences that have happened around the country. And also, it is crucial that, the police officers have the opportunity to engage the citizens. Very often when you're working with people and you are looking to have certain goals to be met, it is easy to no longer see the people as people. I can say that as a pastor. Teachers have that issue. Anyone who works with people, right? And so, in order to make it so that we're not just focusing on how many arrests have happened, how many tickets have happened, it needs to be the case where, yes, the citizens need to see the police officers as servants of the community, people who are here supporting us, but we also want to make it so that the officers have the opportunity to see that these are more than data points. These are people that we're here to serve, that these are mothers and fathers and children, just like my own family, who deserve to have a great environment. And so community policing will meet that goal. What kind of community policing for our context is the larger question, but I think that research can be done and implemented.
Thank you, Reverend. Ms. Delane?
Yes, I'm also very interested in community policing, and I think it's probably something on many communities' mind right now. We feel like the fact that we're not familiar can be contributing to some of these contentions between the police and the constituents. But I'm most specifically interested in that community policing interacting with recruitment and training. And you have to start somewhere, right? So I might never get rid of the residual I've had from my experience with the police. But the 4-year-old doesn't have, hopefully, maybe I should start younger, the newborn, I'm just going to start with the newborn, does not have an experience to relate to the police as of yet. It's a blank slate. We have to start somewhere. We cannot continue to say, well, the police have done this, now this is the issue, this is the climate, and this is how we're just going to have to continue to roll with the punches. It doesn't have to be that way. We can start with the younger generation and work this thing out, so to speak, right? It has to iron itself out. It's the same thing with education. We can say we're behind in it, but if we don't start somewhere, we're not interested in these 10-year goals for some reason, but we need to have these long-term outlooks as to how we're going to improve the relationship between the police and the constituents. There's not going to be a single policy that we are going to put into place that will fix this relationship. This is an entire environment, an entire culture that will have to go through a change, a growth, an evolvement of sorts. An involvement of sorts. You know what I mean? What I'm saying to you is that we can't take what we're going to do today and expect to see that result tomorrow. In order to create this community policing, we need to start with recruitment. People don't want to be police officers, okay? And we know this. And people within marginalized communities especially don't want to be police officers, but we need them to be police officers. They need to be able to see each other. We need to be able to see ourselves in those who are leading us, who are guiding us, who are protecting us, who are serving us. So you can't just take a black person and put them in a police uniform and put them in a black neighborhood. You need to also have training, because there has to be that there to communicate with the neighborhood, to learn how to build community. These things are not necessarily innate, being able to do this, but it will take time, and over time I do believe that we will get to a point where we can look back and say it was in this meeting that we could start the difference and the change. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Delane. And Mr. Javier Gonzalez.
Thank you very much. Well, definitely, I believe in community policing, and but I different communities and different departments have implemented these policies. The importance for me is how does our police department implement these policies and ensure that it is part of the culture of the police. Not just the directives, but how is it internalized by the police officers, and how is it applied? So I think this is, as was mentioned before, that this is something that does not happen overnight. This is not the fact that you pass a directive or a law and things improve overnight. It has to be implemented, and there has to be follow-up. So we need leadership, and that's on your part, but also within the police department. We need transparency, and we were talking about data and how important that is. And we need accountability, and accountability, that means the follow-up. So through the period of the commission, we follow up on the issues that we dealt with before to make sure that there is progress and how there is progress. And finally, we need to focus on and understand that the ultimate test of police efficiency is the absence of crime, not the evidence of police action. And that's what should be our focus in the commission, and use that as a guiding star to our recommendations to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Stevenson.
I like that. Certainly not least. I'd be remiss if I didn't have a story, Reverend. You know, I can't have you out preach me, you know. I would say policy would need to start with more training for our police officers, more frequent training. I learned in the police academy, the Citizens Academy, that our SWAT in Montgomery County, they go through their training once a month. But our county officers don't have something like that once a month. And because we're so diverse, I think that the frequency of our training, we need to increase that. My story would be, before we did the Citizens Academy, they took us through the training center over there in Gaithersburg, where we put on the police vest, the gun, the taser. And so it's okay, John, your scenario is you got the call that there's been a shooting at this office building. And by the way, if you haven't been to that facility, it's beautiful. And so I had a Montgomery County police officer with me, and I had a City of Gaithersburg police officer with me, and they said, go. And my heart was beating. You rushed in the door. You saw people on the floor. You know it was a shooting, and so you go around and you're looking for, you know who has a gun. And I screamed, police, and ran in, and the code word was red to stop, and the assailant was across the wall, on the wall, and there were people on the floor you didn't know were shot. So I saw how intense that was, and they said, John, why did you yell police? I said, because you had to announce yourself. They said, no, you've got the police vest on. They know the call. You have to go and save lives. Okay, let's take it again with John. So we go in there, same thing. I go back in there, I said, police! I yell police again. I said, red, stop. John, why are you yelling police? I said, I don't know. Okay, let's do it again with John. What do y'all think I did that third time? I yell police. I said, John, why? I said, watch too much TV. And so I'm saying that to say, that's me. Police officers are like everybody else. They have issues, they have trauma, they have a lot of things that happen. And are they going to always come and expose their fears to their superiors? Probably not. They're going to go to work like everybody else and deal with it. And there has to be some assessments. We have to put some things into place and can't just trust. I know that when we're in our conversations we had, and our panel discussion was that the police officer is supposed to be their brother's keeper and those things. But if you see somebody could lose their job or something's going on, they're going to probably protect them. What can we put in place that we can assess what's going on with these officers mentally, what's going on with their finances, what's going on with them domestically, so that they're not on the street under so much intense pressure, and then that boils over into a situation that we don't want to have in our county. So how can we put some policy in place that not only they're getting more training physically, mentally, and some assessments that we can make sure that they're okay so that we're okay.
Thank you all for your responses.
All right, to close this out, Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. Council President. And so I think Mr. Javier Gonzalez responded to this question in one of his earlier responses, and all of you touched on it at some point. But I just also want to express my appreciation for you all coming forward and your willingness to serve, and also the vulnerability you've shown in both the stories, but it's those stories that are really critical, that help build the bridges that we expect and hope that you all will build. So my question is related to, as a follow-up to Councilmember Katz's question regarding outreach and meeting the community where they are. And I think one of the challenges, particularly for certain segments of the population, is even that's not enough. And so what can we do? And that's particularly true of our immigrant population, and within the immigrant population, particularly the population that has documentation challenges. And so what can you do? What do you think we should do to ensure that those voices are heard through your important commission as well? And I think we're going to start with Ms. Delane.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, really it's about connecting with the leaders within those communities. I would not even fashion or fathom myself to think that I could speak on behalf of an immigrant community or speak directly to an immigrant community and expect for them to relate to me or to feel like we have a connection. That's not a realistic type of thing. I'm not going to get anywhere, and I want results. I want to be helpful. I want to be resourceful, useful. I want to create an environment of safety. And so in order to do that, I have to connect with the leaders within that community. And that's what they're there for. I mean, they have taken on that charge. And so taking on that charge, I want to take that opportunity. I want to take advantage of them. I want to use them in order for us to be the most successful and have the most effectiveness as a commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I grew up in Washington Heights in New York City. My high school was majority immigrant. It was a very diverse population, mostly Hispanic from the Caribbean, Central America, but throughout, and from also from Europe and Asia and Africa. And as an immigrant myself, the experience was that my parents were not engaged with the community, and they were not. Well, my father was a Catholic deacon, and so he was very active within the community. But in terms of my parents being able to advocate for me in school, they were just incapable. They didn't know how to do it. They had no model of it, and luckily we all went through high school and eventually went on to college. That's critical to understanding the difficulties that immigrants have and other sectors of our community. And the importance is figuring out, are we getting what we need do we know what they're feeling, what their problems are? I could say that I'm a native speaker of Spanish, and not only do I understand Castilian Spanish, but I've served in Central America and South America, and I've heard every different accent in Spanish, so I can even recognize it when they speak English. But the critical thing is figuring out, are we getting what we need? And I think a very important step to begin with, yes, is reaching to the community leaders in each and every community, and establishing an honest dialogue and a sustained dialogue. Because only through sustained dialogue do you build a confidence where people can actually, not only speak their mind, but also be able to express what they really feel. And when you have that confidence, eventually it comes out, and then we learn based on not just because we hear this from this person, but we know this person. And so community leaders, I think, are key. And whatever possible engagement we can, whether it is, going to informal events and community events, I think that's also helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have to echo what Ms. Lane said, and Mr. Javier Gonzalez says we have to trust those who are in those communities. I am ignorant to some of the things that are going on in the communities of undocumented citizens. I know there's a fear. They're not going to call the police, but I believe there are business owners that are trusted, and if we can build relationships with them, those other leaders in those communities, so that they can speak to us and help us to know how to approach some of those citizens in those communities that are, when we had our calls, they were fearful for calling the police for not having a home or being separated from their families. So the sensitivity to that is real. And so if we can develop those relationships with those stakeholders and those leaders that are in those communities, I think that helps us to better serve.
Thank you.
I agree with the sentiment that we need to connect with community stakeholders. I agree with the sentiment that we need to have community events. I wonder to what extent could we hold sessions where people could speak with anonymity. At our church, we serve on Tuesdays and Thursdays, approximately 200 families that are in need of food. Most of them are immigrant families. What we have decided is that we will not ask for certain personal information. They are hungry, and the Lord told us to feed them, so we're going to feed them. In an analogous way, if these persons are living in Montgomery County, they deserve peace and safety. And so if there is a way that we could have, them address their issues where they could come in person, but we can guarantee their anonymity, they can say, hello, I live in this community, these are the issues that I'm having. Within the bounds of the law, I think that needs to take place. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Thanks to each of our applicants. We really appreciate your willingness to serve and your commitment to be here today. The clerk will be in touch with follow-up information after we've consulted. We have one additional final panel of interviewees this afternoon. So thank you very much for joining us. We're going to move on to the next item on our agenda, which is action on item 2, supplemental appropriation 2430 to the FY24 operating budget, Montgomery County Government, Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security, COVID-19 FEMA contract support, $300,000. I will turn it over to Chair Stewart to share the Joint GEO Public Safety Committee recommendation of approval. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Howard and Mr. Hodgkinson, for being here. The county has been using contractual support to assist our Office of Emergency Services and Homeland Security in successfully, and I want to underscore successfully, applying for reimbursement from FEMA for eligible COVID-19 related expenses. The request we have before us today is to fund contractual services to include reviewing and compiling documents, working with departments on writing justifications for expenses, and reviewing expenses with FEMA. The executive notes that the $300,000 requested should be fully eligible for reimbursement by FEMA. As we discussed in our joint session, the amount of money that we've already spent in contractual services has either been reimbursed or should be reimbursed in the near future. The committees also discussed and asked that the council be notified both when there is a preliminary approval for reimbursement and when the county actually receives the reimbursement. All our committee members just expressed our gratitude to the Office of Emergency Services and Homeland Security for their excellent work on this, and we ask that the council approve this appropriation.
We have a joint committee recommendation. I don't see staff needing to add anything with that thorough explanation. Appreciate the director is here as well. With that, those in favor of approving the supplemental appropriation 2430, please raise your hand. Any opposed? That passes unanimously with the committee recommendation of approval. Next, we have action on item number 3, supplemental appropriation 2423 to the FY24 operating budget, Montgomery County Government, Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Service, general personnel and operating costs, the amount of $616,400 from undesignated fire fund reserves. A joint GEO Public Safety Committee recommended approval. Chair Stewart, could you please share the committee recommendation?
Great, thank you so much. So our Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Service provides an EMS program to high school students. In prior years, this consisted of year 1 of the fire training program, and what the fire and rescue services have been doing this year is adding on to the year 1 to for year 2 for the fire training component for the cadet training program. This necessitates many more hours and more trainers, and so this supplemental appropriation is to allow us to extend that for the full training for the cadet training program. And the committees unanimously approved the supplemental, or recommends it to the council.
Appreciate that. I don't see any comments from Ms. Farag and council staff. I don't see any colleagues wishing to speak. So with that, all in favor of the committee recommendation of approval for this supplemental appropriation 2430, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. No one opposed. Okay. We're going to move on to the final item this morning, the consent calendar. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar? I moved by
Second.
Councilmember Jawando, seconded by Councilwoman Katz. Or excuse me, by Councilmember Sales. Excuse me. It was I was going to say the Gaithersburg connection. I was looking at you as I turned over.
I'm glad Sally has joined us at the dais.
Yeah. It's been a long morning. Moved by Councilmember Jawando, seconded by Councilmember Sales, the council person from Gaithersburg. All in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. We are adjourned, and we will return at 1:30 for public hearings.